Live. Good evening. Powell and I
Hello.
are low energy tonight.
Mm,
I hit the wall this morning. Holy cow. Yesterday, I was so high energy that usually, like I said, when I was young, 30 years ago, when I was 25, I used to be able to, I've always been a pretty high energy person, but I used to be able, like when I was home working on my own stuff, I usually start working around 8 and I would just keep going through the day until like 9 o'clock at night. I'd stop. I'd always stop at 9. I'd be useless after 9.
mm.
But then as I grew older, I didn't. Now I stop at about 6. If I'm like sitting here working on whatever I'm working on, I gotta stop. Sometimes I'll go to 7, maybe 7:30 on odd days. Yesterday, I was so high energy. I was getting stuff done. I was working on this drawing, that drawing. Everything was going well. I think I worked till I worked till like 9 at night, from like 8 and 7:30, 8 in the morning to 9 at night. First time I've done that in a long time. This morning I woke up, I was like, oh, I think I hit the wall. Because that's what I'd always do. I know because I want to get things done. I'm working on stuff, working on some of my own drawings. I'd work for days and weeks in a row, and then I go, oh, I forget to like take a day off and rest, which you got to do.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, I just hit the wall and be like, and it hasn't happened in so long since I learned to pace myself. But
Mm.
yesterday, I just kept going.
Yeah, you should expect artists to always be burning the midnight oil.
Yeah, I have to tell people, but you really can't do that too much
Hmm.
because, I've told the people because what happens is, so many artists, it's so hard to do anything. It's so hard to create stuff. It's so hard that once you get rolling, you don't want to stop. So
Yep.
that's why artists burn the midnight. Besides, if a person's a night person or not, it's like once you're in that groove, you don't want to stop. But you really have to teach yourself to stop because otherwise you'll like today. I just couldn't get anything done because I was just burnt, and that'll happen to you too. Where you're like, oh yeah, I'm in that groove. I'm getting stuff done. And you push yourself too hard, and then the next 3 days you can't get anything
Hmm.
done. So it's like you got to learn to. I had to learn to pace myself when I was younger. I pace myself pretty well, but still, sometimes it's like, whew, pacing is it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Mm.
Sometimes you think it's a sprint and you burn yourself out.
Yeah, I'll have to go through my old issues of alter ego
Uh-huh.
because I remember there was an article about a few 1950s artists,
Yeah.
and I can't remember which one it was. So, there's no point in being in this business if I can't keep a regular schedule, because
Right.
otherwise he'd be working too much for low pay, and
Yeah.
he should be doing something else then.
I think John Byrne does that. John Byrne works like 9 to 5.
Mm.
He's done at 4. When he's done for his day. So I've always heard that about him.
Yeah, that it would be amazing. A comic book artist in the 50s being able to do that,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
50s were the lowest paying decade.
Right. Especially if you're like working for Charlton.
Hmm.
Speaking of 19, I always think of this all the time. Because when I go into New York City, even though I'm in New York State, I take the New Jersey Transit train in
Hmm.
because the New York trains are on the. I'm right near the border of New Jersey,
Hmm.
and on the other side of the river of New York is where the New York trains are. So I just the Jersey trains end in New York, sort of in near where I am. So I always get on the Jersey Transit trains, and those are the trains that. Oh, what was his name? Ooh, Paul Reinman? No, it wasn't the 1950s Marvel artist who died, who would have been part of the 60s. Stan Lee's go-to guy. How come I can't remember his name?
I always keep forgetting his name too. I can't believe it.
It wasn't Paul Reinman though, was it? That
No,
was someone else.
Paul Reinman was the guy who didn't have a style.
Right. He died on the Jersey Transit trains though.
Yeah.
Um, Maneely? No, Mike Maneely is a
Yeah, yeah,
current guy.
yeah. Joe Maneely.
Joe Maneely, that's it. Joe
Yeah.
Maneely. Joe Maneely. I always think of Joe Maneely whenever I'm on that Jersey Transit train because that's how he died. He fell off the Jersey Transit train. They're not exactly sure how, but they think he may have been. But he had lost his glasses. He didn't have his glasses and needed his glasses to see. And he was coming home from the city or something late one night, and they think he may have stepped between cars to have a smoke or something, and fell off the train and died. And I was like, and I'm like, whenever I'm riding the same trains, I'm like, wow, that's right over there, because you're always near a door where you're always in between the car. I always make sure not to ride. I'm not riding in between those cars or anything, or because they have all signs: do not open the doors, do not move between cars while the train is moving. But people do sometimes, especially when the train is super crowded, which it's not right now. But I always think of Joe Maneely when I'm on that train.
I don't think we can move between cars in trains in Portugal right now. Not anymore.
No?
Nope. I think those doors don't open.
Okay.
Because there used to be a lot of freeloaders a couple of decades ago. And when the ticket puncher came on the car, they would run to the car at the back.
So hopefully he wouldn't get there by the time they got it, huh?
Yeah. And even on the subway, until about 2003, you could ride on the Lisbon subway for free pretty much 90% of the time.
Wow.
A lot of people did. I did a few times.
Chaos and Comics. Good evening.
Hi, Chris.
Good evening. Yeah, I always think of him, Joe Maneely, when I'm on that train. I'm like, wonder what, and I always like try to picture what, life was, because I'm sure the trains weren't that much different in the 1950s. They look almost the same. It's not like they're sleek modern trains. They look like they could be the same trains from the 1950s, just reupholstered.
Yeah. You don't really need much technology if the car structure remains sound. You can just replace the upholstery, replace the seats.
Yeah.
Do a little painting, and they're okay.
They could easily be mid-century trains. I mean, I always look at them and go, "Wow, I wonder if that." I'm always like, "I wonder which train he fell off," because I don't know where he was. I've never read which train he was on, where he was going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we know that guys at the time they usually lived in or around New York, but we never really know where. Sometimes they'd say, "Oh, he's from Brooklyn," but we don't really know.
They never say Hoboken or Jersey City, which is probably if you run the Jersey Transit trains, that's probably where he was, somewhere around there. But you don't know. And there's also PATH trains and New Jersey Transit trains, which are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think he was on the New Jersey Transit trains. I'm gonna have to look now. I'm gonna go see if I find wherever I read that.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, there's something I'd love to see if there was any newspaper article mentioning artist falls off train in 1958.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, I've no idea. I've never seen that. If there was a newspaper article, I've never seen it.
I don't think. Yeah, you'd think that somebody would have. If there was somebody would have published it in a.
Yeah, would it even make the news?
Right, but if it had been published in the newspaper, any publication about comics would have reprinted it.
Right. You would think if they knew it existed.
Mm-hmm. Although nowadays you can actually look for a bunch of stuff on the newspapers. I sometimes go look for news about IndyCar racing in the 1930s, and there are newspaper items about it, especially on the Indianapolis Star. But yeah, a lot of local local newspapers.
It could have made his local newspaper. You're right.
Yeah, a lot of local newspapers they are available. They're available online.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes you have to go through a paywall to find it, but they're usually scanned nowadays.
Yeah, they are. My mother does our family tree, so she goes to looks up a lot of local newspapers. She even goes to libraries. Before the internet, she'd always go to libraries and look up local archives and things like that. So, I wonder if Joan Maneely had some sort of death notice.
Mm-hmm.
Good question. Never thought about that before. It's funny. I've got back in the aughts, I used to get like Comic Book Artist or Back Issue magazine a lot. The Tomorrows ones.
Mm-hmm.
But then, sort of as there got to be more comics, because especially in from 2005 to 2010, there just weren't a lot of single issues that I liked. It wasn't until Image started putting out a lot of books right around Saga that there started to be a lot of comics for me all of a sudden, and there still are. So around 2000, maybe. I was buying a lot of those, the Two Omaros books, Back Issue, and stuff like Alter Ego, like you said. And there's a lot of reading to be done in those because there's a lot of articles, a lot of interviews. But then I just but they're not cheap. They're like $10 an issue. So when I started getting more comics, I stopped buying them.
Mm-hmm.
But I still have like a pile of them that big.
Yeah.
Every now and then,
my problem with Alter Ego, the magazine was good. At first, when I started buying it, it was bi-monthly.
Right.
And then it was so successful that it became monthly. And that's when I stopped having. I couldn't justify just buying them just to keep them because I really wanted to read them, and it was taking me a lot of time to read them.
Yeah,
those articles are pretty complete. They're very thorough and
good
large
stuff.
Yeah, and all of a sudden I had like a pile this high, and no, can't. I mean, I love this, but I can't justify spending $60 a year if I'm not reading them.
Right, and it's funny. Sometimes I have a stack that big on a shelf somewhere, and I'm like, oh wow, those are so cool. There's so much comic history in them. And I'm like, but am I ever going to read them again? Probably not. I'm like, probably never going to read them again. But I don't want to get rid of them either because they're kind of cool.
Sure. I mean, and for reference purposes, if you're looking at history stuff, if every once in a while you should, although you need to keep track of what was published where, so you should start adding notes to each issue.
I'd be better off getting them digitally, which I do on occasion, just because they're easier to search through digitally than finding the right copy somewhere. But yeah, I love those magazines. Like I said, I haven't read them in a decade. Because like I said, I stopped buying them just because there were more comics to buy. And looks like Maneely had just been laid off by Atlas. Oh, okay. I think everybody at one point the only person left there was Stan Lee, but I think Maneely was the last guy.
When Maneely died, they had started commissioning new artwork because the leftovers from the implosion, they were running out. So yeah, they still ran a few Maneely covers after he died.
I thought he was one of the last guys there.
No, when the implosion happened, everybody was laid off.
Everybody was left already. There was only Stan Lee left.
Yeah, and then they took about 6 to 9 months until they started commissioning new work.
Ah, okay. So he was laid off a little bit, and he was just coming back when he died.
Yeah, a lot of guys didn't come back. So yeah, besides Maneely, Maneely dies. Kirby comes back to Marvel after being laid off from DC. Then they have a small pool of artists. So because Al Hartley's doing a few of them have regular assignments. Al Hartley's doing Patsy Walker.
Right.
Dan DeCarlo was doing Millie the Model. That's 2 years before he leaves to go to Archie. and the guy who did Kid Colt, the guy who later went to Charlton to do the racing car comics. He did Kid Colt for 14 years straight.
Yeah, Ayers?
No. Damn, Kid Colt artist.
Reinman?
No.
Yeah, he'll look him up because I can't remember who did.
Yeah. Kid Colt artist.
Kid Colt for 14 years straight. Wow, I didn't realize anyone did Kid Colt for 14 years straight.
Yeah. Kid Colt artist, 1950.
Kid Colt artist.
I can believe Jack Keller.
Oh, Jack Keller. There's the name.
Yeah, so those were the only ones that had regular assignments. The rest, although I think Dick Ayers was doing White Earp. Somebody was doing White Earp. Yeah.
Right. I remember seeing in the 70s getting some Marvel comics and seeing Jack Keller's name on stuff. He was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I remember liking it. I had no idea who he is, but I just pick up happen to run across some old Kid Colt comics or something. Go, oh, Jack Keller. He's a pretty good artist. But I don't think I ever saw him on. Did he ever do anything else besides Kid Colt?
Well, he did a couple of the non-feature westerns, but the majority of the regular stories, Kid Colt stories. It was him. Then at Charlton, he did the racing car comics. He had a regular strip on 2 of the racing car comics called Rick Roberts.
Okay. We're up Graphic Man's alley here now, Silver Age history.
Well, and I've mentioned in the Fossil show to Charlton 66. I want to do sort of having Charlton 66 show the racing car comics, and I would show the French racing car comics.
I've read Marvel history so much that it always feels new to me again. Impressed with Paolo. He's able to retain all of this. Yeah, he's got a good memory for it.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, there was just a new show. It came out a couple months ago. I just saw someone mention it, called Slugfest, which I think was on Hulu or something. And it's about the rivalry between Marvel and DC, only it's like dramatized. I have not. They have actors playing all the featured players. I was like, oh, that's gonna be weird.
Yeah, especially because there's no point in dramatizing it. The best way to dramatize is to do what Chaykin is doing with Hate Kids comics.
Yeah,
because then you can write stories the way you want them about the actual dramas. Because apart from that, how often did those artists interact with each other?
Not that often. Though I was looking at the cast list for Slugfest, and Howard Chaykin plays himself. He was the only one he was like Howard Chaykin as himself. So I guess he must tell stories. When I'm reading Chaykin's book, it's fun to read because I vaguely remember all the stories. Plus, he takes a lot of artistic life. Yeah, I like his book, but sometimes I'm like, this is thinly veiled. Everybody's a thinly veiled version of somebody, so keeping them all straight is kind of like, I think this is a thinly veiled version of that guy. I think this is a thinly veiled version of that guy. I've heard this story. There you go, Pal and I are in the same mentality. Yep. Both like Chaykin's book. Though, did you read, what was it? Ted McKeever's book. The last book he did before he quit comics. Pencilhead?
No.
He told some stories of his days in comics there, including some about Gil Kane stealing art and such stuff that I've always heard. So he was telling some 80s and 90s stories of his days in comics. That was pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. Yeah, I love history. I love comics. So of course I love comics history. Jared, your Marvel bullpen time. Was there any archive of art and printing plates and stuff filed in the building, or was it housed somewhere else or downsized when art was given back or digitized? Marvel used to have warehouses. what they do was they still had some art. I remember this shocking me when this is the very early 90s. And I remember seeing it was right after Tom Brevoort had started there. And I just happened to be walking by the hall. There was some closet in the hall that was never opened. It was just a closet, random closet. And he happened to have it open one day. I guess he was getting up. I looked in the closet and there was Jack Kirby art in the closet. I'm saying to myself, what is there Jack Kirby art doing in a locked Marvel closet in 1990? But sure enough, it was there. I don't know what it was doing there. And then there was what they would do, they'd return the original art to the artist, but they'd make photostats of it, and that's what was stored. First, they had a warehouse in Brooklyn for decades, but in order to save money, they moved the warehouse to Arizona. And then when Ike Perlmutter took over in like the early 2000s, he was looking to close the warehouse. So this is what Ike did. Scanned in most of the stats, destroyed some of them, and sold whatever comic books were in the warehouse to put the cash in his own pocket. Yes, that's the owner of Marvel Comics used to sell comics and pocket the money if it was in the warehouse. And like I said, I've told the story before where the stats that were from like the romance comics from the 50s, they just destroyed because they didn't want to ever reprint it. This is in like 2003. They were just like, no, we're never going to reprint this. Destroy the stats rather than pay to have them archived somewhere.
Yeah, I'm disappointed. That's pathetically low class for
short-sighted. You know what I just stumbled onto on Twitter? I now follow two people who do it. I forget their names. But there are people there who now specialize in restoring old comics from the printed comics. Like there's one guy who's doing his best to restore Micronauts comics. So he's scanning in all of the Micronauts comics and then, sort of digitally remastering them in Photoshop, kind of, not reconstructing them or anything, but, taking the yellow of the page out and trying to get the black line sharp. And, but I found that, but I didn't realize there were people out there doing that sort of on their own. And this guy's printed books for himself so that he could have like a hardcover Micronauts collection. And there was another guy I just saw doing it with, they just scan in the comics themselves and do it. I'm like, oh, there's an interesting hobby.
Yeah. Yeah. It is an interesting, if you have the money, it's the best way to preserve the stories for yourself.
Yeah. If you have the time. I mean,
printing one single issue in hardcover is expensive.
Yeah.
And it's not like you can do like the Gondwana Land guy who has low print runs, but he does stuff only with things that he knows for sure are in the public domain.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out he actually managed to publish some Marvel stuff because there were a few comics from around 1950, 1951 that Goodman forgot to apply for copyright renewal.
Right. I would be interested in that kind of restoration. Some of the books back then were printed in a muddy and blurry. Yeah, and he shows you his techniques and he shows you how he's trying to get things going. But yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. Like I've had to do some of that sort of stuff at Marvel back in the day when they were printing some of those what are the essential collections, and we had to scan them right from the comics and then make them black and white. Sounds a bit like Dave Sim Dave Sim had to do that because on the pages he didn't have the original art for. He had to scan from the printed page and have it cleaned up. Let me see if I can find his name. I'm gonna have to go to Twitter. There was just a guy. There was just a guy I found today, a second guy. Let me see. Where's my? I need my list of people I follow, but you know what? I'm gonna have to. I have no idea what the guy's name is, but look up Micronauts Restoration on Twitter. Maybe that'll lead you to him because that's the one book he's doing right now. And he had he did some other stuff too, but that's the one he's working on right now. And I think he's obviously some sort of graphic artist who knows his way around Photoshop. Seems expensive to scan them and then make them black and white. No, well, the ones we did from it's not expensive at all. Scanning it is scanning it, and then converting it to black and white. To do it properly would take time, but we weren't doing it properly. That's why if you look at some of those original essentials, you can tell which ones were scanned in and printed because we didn't have time to do it properly. Thanks for the history insight, guy. Yeah, we like history here. Paolo and I are both history fans, and so is Scott and Tim. Yeah, but he, like I said, he's trying to do his best to clear them up, and like it's sometimes a challenge too. And one of the things he said, especially in the Micronauts, he still hasn't found a good way to restore like space black with stars, because what would happen was in the printed copy, the black was never black enough. It was never a thick, rich black. It was always kind of spotty to begin with.
Yeah.
So when you scan it in,
and you can tell you did the black space, and then the parts where they color the stars yellow, they color the yellow over the black, and you notice.
Yeah.
Although I always wonder when you have to do that sort of negative space, how do you leave room for the stars? You're drawing outer space.
Well, you have to do it differently. What it is instead, because usually you have a line and you ink the line. When you know there's going to be black out there, you don't ink the line. You ink to the outside edge of the line. So it's a different way of thinking, because if you ink the line and then bling black up to it, it messes things. You've lost your form. Which is why so many you'll see so many guys put a white outline around their ink line if it's going up against a black background. So many guys do that because they don't know how to make they don't know how to make black meet black. They don't know how to, like, all the old time inkers knew how to do it, but you'll see like from the 90s on, guys put a white outline around a figure. I saw someone do a white outline around a figure rather than have it meet black, because they just know how to. That's just easier. The Draculas, anytime with the essentials where they had the stats for them, they look nice. But occasionally, for some issues, I remember being of the Avengers, they didn't have any archived stats for them, and that's why
I remember they mentioned it back in the Usenet news groups that they had to reshoot some of the Avengers volumes from Marvel Triple Action.
Yeah, occasionally they do that. Occasionally, if it's like they couldn't find like the archived issue of the event of Spider-Man, they could find the Marvel Tales one and reprint that. And sometimes it'd be a different version. That's why when in the early 2000s, when Corey Settlemyer first became the Marvel Masterworks editor, and like he was the first one who cared, because most of the editors there didn't want to work on reprints like Marvel Masterworks, because that's not where the path to, promotion and glory was. Working on, but Corey liked working on that old stuff. So he was the one who tracked down everything and made it like he's the one who put the mistakes back in to the comics that were there in the very first printings that were corrected on further printings. He didn't want if if Doc Ock accidentally called Spider-Man Superman in that issue, what is it, 4 or 6, whatever it was, he wanted that in the reprint of that issue of the Masterworks. So he went back and made sure all that stuff was in there. So, and he would also, sometimes he'd have reconstructions done or have stuff done, and then later on he'd find the original stats and he'd make sure the next printing had those original stats in it. It was, he might still be working there on freelance. I don't think he's been on staff in 15 years, but I think he was working freelance on those Marvel Masterworks.
I think you may be able to find him in the Marvel Masterworks forum, which is where all those guys do the mappings for the more obscure epic collections.
That's where they call them Folk Hero Corey. Yeah, I remember doing all those essentials. That's my one legacy in comics too. Is for some reason there were no page numbers on the essentials. And there were no page numbers on a lot of the collected editions. So what I ended up doing is wherever they had the cover, I'd put a black background. So that at least when you were thumbing through the issue, you could see the black background and find where issues started. And they still do that to this day. But I'm like, you can tell, I think Suzanne Gaffney was the original designer on the Essential Marvel stuff. And hers have no black backgrounds. When I started taking over the production on it, I put black backgrounds on all the covers. And I continued to do that whenever I set up trade paperbacks. Just so I could find where things began and ended. Because otherwise you can't find, there's no page numbers. And I don't know why they still don't put page numbers on stuff. That drives me bonkers.
There was an explanation a few years ago is that the page numbers fell out of place when in the printings, which to me doesn't make much sense.
And digital printing, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's just a key command to make page numbers appear. It's not hard at all. Not hard at all. Yeah, I could never figure that out. But like that giant Jack Kirby book I have that's that thick and that big has no page numbers on it. So it's like trying to look up who did what and where is like, what? And there's plenty of room for page numbers on that. Yeah.
In the Epic collections, they put the page number where the story is, but then you go look for the page number on the page, and it isn't there.
Yeah, there's no page numbers. No page numbers. And I always pushed the copy safe area in those essentials when I did them. Hey, there's Scott.
Oh,
good evening, Scott.
Hello.
Hey.
Because what it is there's a copy safe area usually, which is where, like those old comics were all there was no bleed in all of them, so there's no art going off the edges. So what would happen occasionally was, and like the older comics were a slightly different format. So the proportions were slightly different. And when doing the essentials, sometimes you'd have a choice. I remember with Howard the Duck and so you'd have a choice where, like, if you kept things in the copy safe area, that meant it was like a 1/4 inch shorter on top or a 1/4 inch shorter on the bottom. Or if you matched up the top and bottom, it was going to go a 1/4 inch outside the copy safe area on the left and right. I always made it go outside the copy safe area in the left and right because I wanted the art bigger. I'm like, the odds of something being trimmed off are pretty slim anyway. So I'd rather have, but some people didn't. And the art is like shrunken on the page. And I'm like, oh, I hate that. The choices we used to have to make in production.
What a mess.
And it was one of those things where it was up to you because no one else would even notice. Mm-hmm. How are you doing tonight, Scott?
I overslept. So
overslept.
I'm groggy right now.
I'm just low energy, but not groggy.
I'm very, very low energy right now.
Very low energy. I noticed a few classic Ekman have added or subtracted stuff from the original issues. I'm guessing the bullpen did that stuff when told by the editors. The changes, I think they would definitely, if something like those. I think that if I remember those classic X-Men, they used to split up the issues because it was like they would take like a one-issue story and string it over 2 issues of Classic X-Men and put in a backup story. So they might have to put in like framing sequences and stuff that they'd have the Romita Raiders do. The Romita Raiders were the art correction guys. They were assistants to John Romita, who did all the art corrections under John's eye. He was teaching them how to do everything. So
they were spiritual brothers to the Krusty Bonkers, huh?
Yeah. Except they get paid a lot less.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
They got
Still, to Romita teaching that stuff to new artists. I guess to him it would have been important because if you're a commercial artist, you don't know where your next assignment is coming from. But if you're in the editorial department, at least you have a regular job.
Right. A lot of those guys went on to be Marvel artists too. Scott Koblish was a Romita Raider. He comes to mind. A bunch of others. Tom Morgan was a Romita's Raider. I think Keith Williams was too. So a lot of guys who went on to become steady Marvel artists for a while started out there. It was sort of like an apprenticeship for them. And I think they were usually there for a year.
And that's the first time I'd even thought about classic X-Men in years.
Yeah.
I have a few of them in a box that I probably haven't opened in, gosh, it's been over 20 years, I would imagine.
Matter of fact, there's one story that really pissed off Rob Liefeld. I can't remember what led to it. But for some reason, someone, I don't know who, one of the editors, decided to have the Romita Raiders fix every perspective problem in a Rob Liefeld issue.
Oh, that's an awful lot of work.
It was. I mean, usually the Romita Raiders fixed a panel here and there of something that needed to be corrected. They fixed the whole issue, and he was so pissed. He was not happy about that. He didn't mind when like his inker would fix things or change things, but just the fact that they had the Raiders do it all upset him, which I can understand. And I don't remember what happened that made that happen, but I'm sure there's some story that led up to it, but I don't know.
How obvious was it?
I'm sure it was real obvious to Rob. Sure, it was real obvious when he looked at it and didn't see his own work.
Right.
Saw a whole bunch of other people's work. I don't even know what issue it was, but
saw 22 pages of improvements.
Like he never minded when his inkers fixed his hands or whatever. But when the Raiders fixed a whole issue, he was not happy.
I'd actually like to compare the art.
Yeah, I would like to.
That would be interesting for anything. Just compare.
I would like to know what issue it was. I didn't make note of it back then. Huh.
I'd like to see. You remember when Kirby used to do some covers and they'd have other people go in and change the faces on them?
Yeah.
I'd like to see
Cavern and John Romita. You can tell those.
Right.
Oh, also at DC, was it Plastino who was doing all the Superman heads?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
With that name, he should have drawn Plastic Man.
He should have, but but it's fun. That just I was just reading Mark Evaniers' blog, which I read regularly, and he was telling something about Gru, and how it came to Marvel. It reminded me of. I'm gonna have to write it down and send it to him because he mentioned someone who is the official Gru historian.
Probably like, Gary Grossman, I would imagine.
There's such a thing. Yeah, I don't know who it is. I forget the name, but it was on his latest blog. But it reminded me of a story of a page when Gru went wandering. The page, because this is probably 1990. 1991, somewhere around there, because it was before the bullpen got redone in early 92.
Right.
There used to be tours at Marvel all the time, like once or twice a week. And it was pretty easy to get a tour. They'd have like local high schools or whatever come through on a tour. Right. The tour would be led by an actor in a Spider-Man costume a lot of the time. And like I said, it was pretty easy to get up there and get tours. So our one friend Sherry asked my friend Ed March. She's like, "Oh, I know this local kid. He's a big fan at Marvel. Can you get him a tour?" Ed's like, "Sure." So, and Ed would do that every once in a while for a friend of a friend. So this kid, 10 or 12 years old, comes up, and there's usually the bullpen had nothing to do on a Gru comic because the pages came in finished. The only thing the bullpen ever had to do in a Gru comic was to paste down the indicia, that little bit of legal information that was on the splash page of every comic.
Right.
So, it would get typeset by the typesetter. They'd print out a copy, on typesetting photo paper. Marcus McLuhan was the editor at the time. He'd bring out the indicia and the splash page and gave it to Ed. Ed had to paste it down. Simple. Nothing to do. Well, this kid comes up. Ed shows him around, talks to him. Kid leaves. Ed goes back to his work to put down the indicia on the splash page, and he can't find the splash page. He can't find the page.
Right.
He's looking all over, and I could remember I used to sit across from him. His desk faced my desk, and there was, a walkway between us. And he looked over at me and went, "Jared, I can't find that Gru page." I'm like, "What? What do you mean?" He's like, "I think that kid stole the Gru page." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "The Gru page, isn't it?" He's like, "It's gone." The kid is walking around. It's nowhere. So then Marcus comes out to get his Gru page, and Ed's got to tell him the page isn't here anymore. Marcus is like, "What?" He's like, "I think," and he doesn't even know this kid's name. So Ed has to call up our friend Sherry, who barely knows this kid too, but at least she knows his name. Track down his mother's number, call him up, and Ed's talking to him on the phone, going, "Listen, a page is missing. Do you have the Gru page?" He's like, "Gru page? I don't have any Gru page." He's like, "Are you sure? Guy with a sword?" He's like, "Oh, that ninja drawing you gave me?" And it's like, "Yes, that page, we need it back." The kid's like, "Oh, I thought you gave it to me." Because Ed was showing him the page, and the kid just took it and stuck it in his bag and went on. So I was like, the kid had to come back. I think he came back the next day with the Gru page.
Right. Wow.
Because there wasn't even a copy. No one even made a photocopy of it or anything. It was just. Well, that's how that Gru the Wanderer page went a-wandering. What was that?
Was he sweating bullets when the editor came to get the page?
You should have seen him. He was like, Where'd the page go? You know,
wow.
pages don't just disappear. He
Of course,
was
in Sergio, you could have called him and he could have drew another one in like 2 minutes. So.
didn't want to have to do that.
Right. Wow, that's funny.
Spider-Man tour guide. On your left is a locked closet. Stan Lee doesn't let me go in there. Yeah.
I looked up that page on Mark's blog, and I saw a picture of Carol Kalish.
Oh yeah.
First time I'd seen a picture of her in a long time.
Yep. Everybody was stunned when she died.
Yeah,
I didn't really know her. She worked downstairs, but I remember everybody being stunned.
Right. She was like one of those people that like everybody just loved.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even at other companies.
Yeah, yeah. She had a very good reputation.
Right.
Very, very nice woman. That reminded me too, I was to say that with the art stuff, Marvel Marvel used to have an art returns guy.
Mm-hmm.
Their job was to make sure that the art got returned to the artist. That's what they did. They split it up between the inker. They archived stuff too. And it was Wilson Ramos was the art return guy. I think he was the last art return guy before they abolished the position because people didn't send art in anymore. And he had an office. This is in our 40s, but he had art from still in the art returns office from like the early 60s because they just didn't know who to return it to.
Yeah.
So it just sat there. They weren't sure exact. He always did his best to find out who did stuff and return it to them or their family.
Right.
But often they just had no clue who did it, and if they did have a clue, there was no heir left alive that they knew of, so it just sat there for ages.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. I only got 5 comics this week. A nice cheap week for me. Norse Mythology, Volume 3, which it says nowhere on the cover.
Right.
So years from now, when people are searching for these in the back issue bins, they're not going to be able to tell issue 3 of Volume 1, 2, or 3 unless they check the indicia. So it's going to confuse a lot of people.
I was just wondering if the coloring on the logo is different on each volume.
Yeah, I don't know. But it's usually different from issue to issue, so. But this one, and this just, it's like the stories kind of begin and end wherever the beginning ends. So the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the first 6 pages are finishing up the story from last issue.
Right.
So, and then like I said, it ends, and then we get and I liked the art in this one. It was by that issue was by David Rabin, and then we get some Colleen Duran doing the next story, which has some weird color in it. Sometimes sometimes her skin tone, like all of a sudden Loki has some nice airbrushed blue eyes. And I generally like Colleen Duran's art, but I found her coloring a little distracting sometimes.
Did she do the coloring on that one?
I think so, because it says art by Colleen Duran, and there's no
colorist.
No colorist listed.
Gotcha.
But it's good stuff. I mean, this is, and of course, Craig Russell is doing the layouts and the adaptation.
All right.
So it's always good. The first story was ending the story of how Thor got the giant ale bowl or whatever it was from the giants. And he also ends up killing 100 giants or so. Boy, Thor's magic hammer in these myths was really a magic hammer. I mean, the Mjolnir, if you were hit with Mjolnir in these myths, you were dead. I mean, there was
pretty much.
There was no walking away from that. Like Thor's hammer in the comics, he's not killing people with it. And, people walk away from it all the time. In this one, you don't walk away when you get hit with Thor's hammer. You're done. It's Valhalla for you. Or hell. But That's it. And the next story is about the story of Balder and who was it? Freya? Is it Freya or Frigga?
Freya.
Freya. No, it's Frigg.
I don't know. Frigg and Freya are different gods.
They're different gods, but they might be the same. No one is sure. I was just reading up on them.
Yeah.
Because so many of those European gods come from original source, and then they go with these people, then they go with these people, and they mix again. And there's the two who Friday, they're not even sure which one Friday exactly is named after. Might be named after both or one, or they might be the same. And Frigg here is Odin's wife, and Freya is another goddess who Odin may have been involved. It's weird. I was just reading up on them and some of my ancient history stuff, and they're like, just nobody knows if they're the same or not, because they're definitely different at different times. They definitely were different gods at times, but they may have had a common origin or they may not have. But their names are similar, so they confuse everyone all the time.
Well, maybe it's an in joke they just came up with. If you don't like Freya, then Frigg you. Yeah.
Graphic Man wants you to show more of the book.
Here, hold on. Let me go solo. We'll show you some Colleen Duran art. Nice stuff.
Yeah, I've always liked Colleen's art. She's really.
This is her getting all of the things to swear not to hurt Balder.
That's
a Craig Russell cover.
Mm-hmm.
And the first guy in this book, whose art I really enjoyed, what is his name again? David Rubin. He's got an accent over that I in Rubin, so I'm sure you have to.
Not familiar with him at all.
It's Spanish.
Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Some nice stuff. But definitely, I've enjoyed. I think this is the last volume.
It is.
But I've enjoyed all this. These are just so good. This is just A level comics here, and the stories are so simple too. They're telling of old tales, but they're done so well and they're so involving that
Craig is so good at adapting things.
Oh, he is. And the artists he's working with here are terrific.
Yeah.
So I've just been enjoying this one since issue 1. It's
it's
one of those I wasn't sure if I'd enjoy or not, because it's just kind of like Norse myths, who cares? But they're really good.
Makes me interested in what Craig's going to do after that too.
I never understood why some titles publishers make it hard to find volume info and don't list inside stuff credit wise. It is sheer laziness. I'll tell you exactly why. Because I'll tell you why. Marvel always up until the mid-90s, Marvel always had volume numbers in their stuff. And that was because of one guy. And this is what I'm sure this is what happens at DC too. Dan Carr was the typesetter there, who I told you before when we put the indicias in, it's got to be typeset. Cover credits are new, though. Cover credits are still new to me, even though they've been around for 20 years. Actually, the credit of the guy who drew the cover, right? That's fairly new too. Cover credits, like people's names on the covers, is actually fairly new. But yeah, I know what you mean. But at least they used to have signatures on the covers. I was
just going to say, more often than not, usually the cover.
You used to be able to tell because they had signatures. They'd let them sign the covers, but not always.
They don't do that now?
But anyway, Dan Carr was the typesetter. When you needed an indicia, you'd go to Dan, indicia for Gru number 87. He'd get his files, type one out for you. This is before digital publishing, but the typesetting was still like one of the first things to have a keyboard because it had to be typeset. So whenever there was a new comic, you had to get a new indicia, like issue 1 of Night Thrasher.
Right.
the legal department would have to make an indicia that would go to editorial. They'd send it to Dan to be typeset. Dan always made sure the volume number was right because he was the last guy in line. He'd go and say, what volume number of Night Thrasher is this? Volume 1? Volume 2? It's volume 1? Okay, volume 1. He'd make sure he typeset volume 1.
Well, they had to qualify for Class 2 postage. So
right.
Because if a volume was closed, you legally had to start a new one, or you'd have to to continue the old numbering. You couldn't restart the numbering.
But legal wouldn't even pay attention to that because I have to imagine whoever's job it was in legal to make sure the indicia stuff was right was low end. They were that was the first job you got in legal, was making sure that's not a high.
So that was the entry level job.
Yeah, there's the word I'm looking for. Entry level position indicia. So they didn't know, they didn't care. But it was Dan who always made sure that the volume number was the typesetter. Right. Not the event. And I know this because I used to fill in for Dan doing the typesetting. So sometimes I'd do the same thing because that's what Dan taught me.
Right.
At some point, Dan got promoted, and there's no longer. Once we went to digital publishing, there's no longer a typesetter. Now it's just a digital file that comes to whoever the production guy is, and they never paid it. The production guy was always just handed a piece of paper they had to paste down. They had no control over the indicia. That continued in the. Now it was only the lawyer had control over the indicia, so they just sent it in a file that the production guy wasn't allowed to change, so they just put it in there. They couldn't put whatever they wanted in there. It was whatever this unmodifiable file was you had to put in. So the production guys never asked questions because they couldn't modify the file anyway if they wanted to.
Right.
And the legal never paid attention to volume numbers. So that's when Marvel, as soon as Dan stopped paying attention to volume numbers went away at Marvel. There was no plan to make them go away. There was no reason to make them go away. There was no point to making them go away. It was just that the one guy who paid attention to them had a new job and wasn't paying attention to them anymore. Right. So it's like, I imagine that the same thing may have happened, or at DC, maybe nobody was ever in charge of volume numbers. So it's like a completely mundane explanation for why Marvel stopped using volume numbers.
Interesting.
There needs to be a Dan Carr tribute book. I'd buy it, but I'm guessing only 3 other guys. He is still at Marvel. He's like the director of technology or something now. He's still there.
There's a bunch of people that we really never hear of, which I suppose would have been your job as well.
Right.
Yeah, because the magazines that I've worked at, we had to have credits for everyone. The guy who sold advertising, the people who put the magazine together, pasted everything. Our archivist, but in the US you never have to do that.
No, that only happened in some publications. Like they'd credit people in Marvel Age. You'd see the bullpen credited. Hello there, Mr. Gretzky. But like Sue Crespi, Danny Crespi's daughter, who was in the bullpen with me in the early 90s, is still there. She's still, I forget what her title is, but she's one of the few people who's been there for 30 years now. So, because usually there's very few people who've been at Marvel that long. Most people move on or get fired or laid off. Right. But yeah, she's still there. Dan Carr's still there. They're the only 2 people from my bullpen days, I think, who are still there.
Mm-hmm. Let me see. One of my magazines. So,
but yeah, if you look in old issues of Marvel Age, you can find bullpen. You can find my name in some of those sometimes because that's where they had the room to put people's name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the car magazine that I currently write for. Yeah, we got everyone here, and this one isn't done by that many people, but everyone is here. You have to have this because this is all the legal information. Not only the editor in chief, everyone who writes, people in charge of being the secretary,
Right.
Advertising, production and layout, where it's printed, and how many issues are printed, how many times a year it's published, and whoever handles the distribution. You got to have all of these. They have to be here.
Jared, was Jim Shooter around? Now I came right after Shooter, so I've never met him. I don't really care that much about continuity, only because I don't read that much Marvel and DC. I think Marvel and DC should care about continuity. That's what put them on the map.
If you had continuity, you would have never had to worry about things like Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there's never. I mean, I agree with what Eric Larson said. All continuity is you believing all this stuff happened to one character. I think that's all you really need. The idea that time moves slower and that you can't have real continuity if the characters don't age. So as long as the characters aren't aging, that's going to make your continuity. But just make everybody believe that all this stuff is happening to one character. That's all I need for continuity. But doesn't always happen.
And like you said, you generally don't have to worry about it so much with creator-owned books either.
And I think I wrote her name down. I just saw someone, a long-time employee at Marvel. She was in charge of the subscription department, among other things, just died. And I remember her name. She was one of the people from upstairs, but that someone wrote a little tribute to her. And I think I could have said that she was also the one in the 60s who convinced them to archive stuff, because she was big into history. Right. And she's the one that Marvel fans have to thank for archiving all their comics from the 60s and being able to reprint them. Because without her, they would have just got rid of them. So that's why it's so often it's just one person. Like with the Indicia, it was Dan Carr, the last person. Yo, Saul. I'm gonna have to find her name. I think I wrote her name down somewhere, or took a screenshot, or saved it, just because I was like, "Oh, look at that! I'm gonna have to know her name." Not Millie was in charge of. I think she may have been the second along. Millie Sharif, is that her last name? She was the one who was in charge of vouchering and everything for like decades at Marvel. And this other woman was there along with her, just about as long, since the 60s. But yeah, these unsung heroes who we don't know about. Huh. And let's see, another comic I got. Lady Mechanica, number 3 of The Monster of the Ministry of Hell. This is the first Lady Mechanica series I've ever been reading. I think it's only 4 issues, so there's only 1 issue to go. And I liked issue 1. Issue 2 was Issue 3 was better. And the problem with issue 2 being is because it's about Lady Mechanica's childhood when she was in an orphanage being mistreated. And it's really not a pleasant story to read about a child mistreated in an orphanage.
Right.
It's tough to... And
I mean, unless the kid is just a natural prankster and, has comedy value, it's a tough story to...
There are all sorts of weirdos and freaks in this orphanage that they were doing experiments on in murdering.
Oh, boy.
So, and then there's this sort of framing sequence with Lady Mechanica and these kids and somebody, I guess this is in the present day, and they're like going to a carnival, and it seems to have nothing to do with the story in the past. I'm kind of like, oh, why was that there? But I did actually enjoy this issue. I think just the story was better told in this, and And she had a little adventure in the orphanage too. So the story was, let me show you a little art in this one. But this is also very much the sort of 90s pinup style art where they tell the story around different big panels. Where's a good... Oh, and they also give you the cover as a centerfold. And they give you the alternate cover on the other side. So I'd have to pull this one out to see the whole the other, side is on the half. So it's interesting that they give you the covers as pinups in the centerfold. But this issue was a solid B. I don't know. After the 4th issue is done, I don't think I need to pick up another Lady Mechanica series. Just because it's not that interesting that I want to follow it even more. Yeah. Great art story, not so much. Exactly. That's just it. The covers are always cool. But the story is pretty bland, except for, miserable kids in this one. You guys ever read any Lady Mechanica?
Never have.
Never have. Like I said, I've looked at the covers.
Series, isn't it?
What was that?
It's like the 2nd or the 3rd series of it, isn't it?
Oh, more than that.
Okay.
It's like the 10th series of it, I think. There've been a lot of series I haven't paid attention because I never see it on the stands. It's not a book that there's a lot of shelf copies of.
All right.
I think I had to. I think I ordered the first issue, just the first issue, on my pull list, and then put the other 3 issues on after I read the first issue and kind of liked it.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and speaking of Jim Shooter, one of the things that annoyed me was there was a lot of kind of Jim Shooter hate at Marvel when I was there, led by Ralph Macchio. He was the head. I didn't like, making Jim Shooter jokes because he didn't like Jim Shooter, which was fine with me if Ralph Macchio didn't like Jim Shooter. But what drove me nuts were these sort of Ralph Macchio sycophants who weren't even there when Jim Shooter was there, making Jim Shooter jokes too. And I'd be like, dude, you just started working here this month. Jim Shooter's fired 3 years ago. You don't know Jim Shooter. Why are you making Jim Shooter jokes? Because they were kind of Ralph sycophants. So they, to fit in with Ralph, they'd make Jim Shooter jokes. Matter of fact, it was one time like last year, I mentioned that on Facebook one day. And I mentioned something about, Ralph having his little minions who would just go around saying Jim Shooter joke. And when one of his little minions was like, no, what? No, that never happened. And I was like, dude, you were one of the little minions. He's like, no, I wasn't. I came by. He's like, I didn't like Jim Shooter before I got to Marvel. I'm like, you didn't know Jim Shooter before you got. But he even though it's like privately people were mentioning me, can you believe he thinks he wasn't one of Ralph's little minions? It was just kind of funny. But he really didn't think he was. He's like, I came by my Jim Shooter hate honestly. I'm like, okay, if you say so.
Honestly, by osmosis. Huh?
Yeah, blaming his old blaming old manager. Like I wouldn't mind like the people who didn't like Shooter who worked with Shooter to badmouth him, but the people who never worked with Shooter who were bad-mouthing him just to get in good with Ralph was like, oh, come on. Especially since you can get in good with Ralph other ways. I mean, it's not like you had to. But my impression of Jim Shooter was that editorial eventually he eventually wore out. He was so controlling. He eventually wore out his welcome with editorial. But most of the freelancers liked him because he looked after the freelancers. And I know somebody like Jack Abel, who you know who Jack Abel was, the inker, longtime artist in comics.
I've heard of him.
Jack Abel was one of these guys who everybody loved in comics. Everybody was friends with Jack Abel. Everybody loved hanging out with Jack Abel. You know, there's stories about him up in continuity because he worked in continuity comics in the at Neil Adams' place in like the 70s. So that's where a lot of people know him from continuity. You hardly hear a bad word about Jack Abel. He was one of those kind of guys. And I think it was in the 80s, he had a stroke and he couldn't ink anymore. So Jim Shooter made sure that Marvel, like I said, because he liked Jack so much and everybody liked Jack so much, he made sure that Jack Abel was covered through Marvel's insurance somehow. And then he hired him as a proofreader. That's where I know Jack from. He was a proofreader at Marvel from the 80s all through to when he died in 96, I think it was. But that's where I know Jack. He was Marvel's proofreader. And it was Jim Shooter who created the position of proofreader for him and made sure Jack was taken care of. So Jack always, of course, said nice things about Jim Shooter. So that's why he always, even though I don't know Jim, just the fact that he took care of Jack makes me feel good about him.
There were a few. Well, John Byrne is the obvious exception of a freelancer who didn't like Shooter, and there's of course the Tony Isabella story with Ghost Rider. Yeah, still in the 70s. Although in the 70s that thing was probably so chaotic that an editor actually doing his job was a novelty to most of the creators.
I actually. Good evening. Okay. I actually like John Byrne's take on Jim Shooter and Paul Levitz. Mm-hmm. John Byrne said Jim Shooter was very good at coming into Marvel, which was chaotic and failing, and instilling order. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't very good once order was installed at being a day-to-day kind of editor-in-chief. Paul Levitz was great at being an everyday, day-to-day editor-in-chief. But he was not the kind of guy who could create order out of chaos. He was like, he said he thought that Paul Levitz and Jim Shooter should switch jobs every few years. I thought that was interesting.
Complimented each other then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I thought that was an interesting observation.
Mm-hmm. And there was one exaggerated story which came from Doug Mensch. Yeah, because according to Doug Mensch, Shooter drove Gene Day to an early death.
Oh yeah, I've heard that. Matter of fact, I remember there was an article in the Comics Journal after Gene Day died called "Jim Shooter Did Not Kill Gene Day." That was the name of the article. Wow. I remember reading that and going, "Oh, okay." It was a defense of Jim Shooter not killing Gene Day because there was some talk about he, worked him so hard that he had a heart attack, but apparently that wasn't the case. But also, to finish the Ralph Macchio story, another reason I always had a warm, I never bought into the Jim Shooter hate was because I didn't like most of the Ralph Macchio minions, and Ralph Macchio didn't talk to me for like a decade.
Pretty long time.
I don't. And when I say I don't. It was and I don't want to say he purposely ignored me or anything. Nothing like that. But usually, but Ralph first of all had all his assistant editors interact with the bullpen. He never did much. So that's usually how you got to know the editors. They usually had their assistants drop stuff off. Sometimes they came out. You got to know we all worked on the same floor. and we drop off at everybody chit chat with each other. It was very friendly, very unlike DC, which I worked at for 2 weeks, and no one ever talked to each other there between editorial and the bullpen. But Ralph wasn't one who came in and talked with people in the bullpen much. And he wasn't even one to really say hi in the halls. So I just got used to ignoring him. Like I said, I didn't take it personally. I didn't know why. I don't know him that well. But like I said, but then it was like, it was after, because Marvel was at 387 Park Avenue South from like when I started there in 1990 till like 2001. And in all those years, Ralph never talked to me. We moved to 40th Street, and new building, new everything. And it's like a few months into 40th Street, I'm passing Ralph in the hall in the morning. Like I said, I'm usually just, maybe he'd nod hello, that's it. This morning, he's like, hey, hello, Jared, how you doing this morning? And I'm like, hey, Ralph, I'm doing fine, okay. And from then on in, he talked to me like a normal person. And I'm like, what? Why didn't he talk to me the other 11 years?
Did you get a haircut that day or something? Or?
No, I was just like, listen, I don't want to, he wasn't mean to me or anything. He wasn't, he just, was never chatted with me ever.
It's like turned a switch on like that.
Yeah, I was just like, I was stunned. I was like, yeah. Oh, from then on in, it was like, hey, how you doing? Good morning. Yeah, how's it going? Oh, you check out that show. Oh, yeah. Normal, everyday chit chat.
Right. It's funny.
Did I pass a test? It was just very strange. Wouldn't Mensch scripts be what had Tay working so hard? No, there was some talk. I remember at the time of I'll tell you I'll tell you that story in a moment. The drive into work must have been nice. Put him in a good mood. Yeah. I remember the stories of, I think Gene Day was Canadian.
He was.
And there were stories of when there was a deadline happening. Sometimes Jim Shooter used to call up Gene Day, and Gene Day would take a train down from Montreal to New York City. And he'd stay in the Marvel offices, and he'd stay up late and draw. And he'd get a lot of stuff done after hours, working hard on the deadline.
Right.
And he also didn't take care of himself very well physically. But there were some people who thought that all that late night work and whatever that Gene Day volunteered to do it because,
Gotcha.
he wanted to be the guy. He wanted to be the valuable, I assume. Freelancers are like that. Someone gives you a job, you take it. But that was the story, that it was Jim Shooter worked him to death. Mm-hmm. But it turned out to be an exaggeration.
Yeah, he made him come specifically from Montreal to New York to draw a story overnight. That was the story.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of time that it takes you to drive from Montreal to New York, you might as well stay in Montreal.
I think he was on a train, if I remember correctly, because I remember him drawing on a train. I don't know. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, but still, of course, you don't bring in a freelancer all the way from Montreal to make him draw overnight. The concept itself is ridiculous, and people get ready to start believing anything.
A lot of people don't know that.
So. I worked in the DC bullpen for 2 weeks, one January. It was because I used to be a freelancer. I was, though I was there regularly, I was technically freelance. I'd come in and work for a while and then leave because I wanted to be an artist. So I didn't want a full. So I'd work there for 2 months. I'd be gone for a month. In the end, I ended up working there for the last 5 years or so. I was there 3 days a week and not 2 days a week. I think Day was infamously a workaholic all along. Exactly. It wasn't Jim Shooter who killed him. But anyway, this was when, I think it was the third Marvolution. In case you don't know what the Marvolution was, there were mass firings at Marvel. When Marvel was in bankruptcy, there were 3 mass firings, which were awful. The first one, we were all, and everybody knew something was coming. This was in December 96. I'd have to look up the date, somewhere around there. And we'd just be sitting around, like all of editorial in the bullpen were on the 10th floor. So, we all worked together all the time. And phone calls started coming down. So if you got a phone call, you were fired. So in the bullpen kind of, and so all of a sudden you'd hear a phone ring and you'd see an editor and an assistant editor come out of their office and they'd be like, and you knew everybody'd be like, oh man, sorry. And they'd have to go upstairs and get fired. Right. And in the bullpen where we had shared phones, the phone would ring, someone would answer it and go, Johnny, the phone's for you. And they're like, oh, because Johnny had to take the phone call and go upstairs and get fired.
Right.
And it was just the most miserable thing you can think of. I mean, that's
not good.
What's more miserable than that? And we were just, everything, of course, stopped as we were just waiting for the phone call to see who would get fired. Well, the third time that happened, because like in the bullpen, there were people on staff and there were people who were freelance. Most of the freelance people wanted a staff job. I didn't particularly. So what happened was the third one, we knew from there was about a half a dozen of us who were there who were freelancers. And we did the bullpen work. We did it freely. We come in for the day, do the work. They'd pay us for the day. We knew everybody was getting fired. We knew that come January, because the word had come down like in the beginning of December, they're going to have to let all the freelancers go in January. So there was lots of gallows humor all through that December. Yeah. And sure enough, in January, they let us all go. I got let, but I was used to coming and going. So I was like, oh, well, they're letting me go. At that same time, someone said, oh, they're looking for a freelancer in the DC bullpen. I was like, okay, I'll go. And Marvel had been completely computerized by then. DC hadn't been. DC had just recently started being computerized, so they didn't know what they were doing. And also, like I said, in the Marvel bullpen, I actually worked there 2 days and 20 minutes out of a 2-week job. In the DC bullpen, it was completely different. And I'm told, like I said, with Marvel, we just handed the work right. The editors it's like Virginia Romito was in charge of the bullpen. She was in charge of trafficking. So if you needed something in a rush or something right away, you'd go to the editor would go to Virginia and she'd hand us the work. Otherwise, on a normal day, the editor who we were assigned, we'd either pick from the pile of work, or the editor who we were assigned that month would give us work. So we worked right with the editors. There was no a very efficient system where everybody knew everybody. At DC, the bullpen was on one floor and the editorial was on another floor, and never the twain shall meet. And I'm told, when I was there in the 2 days, I was told this whole system was DC was much more corporate at the time. Marvel's as that corporate now, but they were much more corporate, and their whole system was designed so that two guys who didn't like each other didn't have to talk. So that what would happen at DC was I'd be sitting there at my desk, my computer, and the head of the bullpen, a guy named Mark Maz, would all the work would go through him. And he would come out and hand it to a bullpenner, to whoever was available. And what was weird was, like in the Marvel bullpen, once you started a job, you finished the job. Like if I was working on a cover, I'd work on that cover from beginning to end. At the DC bullpen, it wasn't like that. If you started working on a cover, you'd have to send it back to the editorial for approval, and then they'd bring it back to whoever was available at that time. So you could be working on whatever. You didn't get to finish any of the jobs you started. It was really weird.
It's been frustrating.
But anyway, one of the things, it was a 9 to 5 job. One of the things I told them when I started working there was I have to leave right at 5 because I have a long commute and my bus leaves at 5:20. So I have to, I'm like, that's okay. I can leave right. Yeah. Okay. No problem. So, and also there was a woman, I think, who's still at DC now. She's the head of their, Allison Wolfson. I can't remember her last name. I worked with her at Marvel. She was at Marvel for like a couple of years in the 90s. And I think she was the head of DC's production, but she was the one who worked with the print. Really nice woman. So when I got there, I saw, oh, hi, Allison. We talked for a few minutes, and she was actually my boss's boss. This guy, Mark's boss.
Right.
So here I am. I'm doing my work, and he's at one point he's like, "Okay, you're doing that. What I want you to do is, I want to send you down here to the scanner, do some scanning." Okay, so I go to another room. I'm doing scanning, get that done. First day was okay. I get back to my desk. I pack up. I go home. No problem the first day. The second day, but I sense a little something with this guy. He's a kind of a bit of a control freak, I can tell. And I found out later from other people in the department that he liked to stay late and have people stay late with him. Even though I had a discussion going into this job that I had to leave at 9 to 5. So the second day I'm there doing my work. And once again, he sends me down to the scanner room, which is down the hall. So I'm scanning stuff in. Now, the way I'm sitting in the scanner room, I can see outside the hall, people walking by. And I see, he's among the people walking by. So I'm just sitting there scanning till about 5 o'clock. And at 5 o'clock, I go back to my desk, get ready to pack up, and I see some work on my desk that says, "Jared, see me about this right away." And I'm like, he's been walking by me for 2 hours.
Right.
So I pick it up. I go into his office. He's not there. I'm like, this mother. Yeah. It's like now I really don't trust his motive. So I just put it down and leave. And I'm fuming. I'm just like, I can tell you. I'm like, this guy's a passive aggressive control freak. I can tell. The next morning I go in, and Allison and I, his boss, are the only ones in there. And she's like, "Oh, Jared, how's it going?" I'm like, "I'll let you know in about half an hour." She's like, "What?" I was like, "I don't know if I can work with this guy. I'll let you, if I can't work with him, I'll come in here and tell you, and I'll just leave. Everything's cool." She's like, "Oh, okay, let me know." So he rolls in about 9:30, and he's like, "Jared, I have to see you in my office." And he's like, "Jared, I left this on your chair and told you to see me." And I was like, "Hold on a second. Keep in mind, I'm a freelancer for a reason. I'm not afraid to walk the hell out if you try torturing me." I was like, "Hold on a second. Didn't you I was like, "Didn't you put me down in that scanner room?" He's like, "Yes." I'm like, "Didn't you walk by me all afternoon?" He's like, "Well, yes, but." I'm like, "Then why didn't you tell me this was a rush then?" He's like, "Well, I can't." He's like, "Well, this is our busiest season." Now, here's a funny thing. He even tells me this is our busiest season. I found out later he had been there for 6 months. This is our busiest time of the year. And I said, "I told you I had to leave here right at 5. He's like, "Well, we might have to stay late." I said, "So you're telling me if I can't stay late, you don't want me?" He's like, "Well," I was like, "Okay, bye." And I walked into Alan's office and said, "I cannot work with this guy. He is awful." And she signed my voucher for the day. I went out to my desk. I packed up my stuff, and he comes out and he goes, "Well, you can finish out the day if you want." I'm like, "No." She already paid for my day anyway because she's supposed to. And I left. I was just like, oh my, I get the guy, like in 2 days, the guy drove me crazy. And
Wow.
I was told that later on that I became a folk hero in the DC bullpen because no one could stand this guy. And he got fired a few months later for being terrible. But that was my 2 days and 20 minutes at DC because of one guy. No, the funny thing was, after I left, where did I go? Back down to Marvel. And they were like, ooh, can you come in tomorrow? Because they got rid of all their freelancers and had no one to do the work.
Yeah.
So I immediately started back at Marvel. Missed all the other freelancers though. It was less fun without them. But that was the story of my 2 days and 20 minutes working for DC Comics in the bullpen. All because of one guy. It didn't last. Great work story. Oh yeah, it's a good one.
Well, I'm gonna go. I wake up in 5 hours 30 minutes.
All righty.
Yeah. So me and Cal are trading shifts now.
Yeah. Next week he
gets to go sleep.
Yeah. Next week I'll go back to the 1 p.m. 10 p.m. shift. So I'll do a more regular show. All right. See you later, guys.
Have a good one. Now that asshole's gone.
No, I woke up here in the chair and I'm like, Alexa, what time is it? And like, oh. Yeah.
Man, many firings are followed by hiring. Yeah. Like I said, I'm being that I was the one who came and went, and it's like everybody else who was a freelancer, I knew would have to. Good night, Paolo. Everybody else who was a freelancer was not coming back because they'd all have to find new jobs because they wanted to work there full time. I didn't have that, so I knew I could come back when they needed me. Right. Friar Tuck. And I thought my job was a shit show. Yeah, like I said, that one guy made everyone's life miserable at DC Comics until they got rid of him. That's what I was told, and he certainly made my life miserable for 2 days and 20 minutes.
It's usually one person somewhere in middle management that manages.
Yeah. Welcome to the comic industry.
Make everything terrible.
Yeah, it was just like, like I said, I couldn't last with him. I was just like, he was messing with me in the first 2 days, and it was just like, oh my god, what is with this crazy guy? Like it was later I found out that he liked to stay late, and he liked people to stay late with him, so he'd have company. Just like,
Wonderful.
What was Allison's? I think Allison may still be with DC. She was good. She's a nice woman.
You were talking about the dishes earlier. Imagine the guy, Dan or whoever, it was always nice for him for Gru because all I had to do was just change the issue number to the consecutive number.
Yeah, that's all that was. Just change, because the Mark Evaniers blog was all about how there was like 27 people listed as editors, but they never edited anything with Gru. They just handed it in.
Yeah. Another funny story about Sergio too. He only ever missed a deadline on one issue of Mad Magazine, and that was the mail snafu.
Huh. He was fast, that's for sure. But I know a few people after they got fired from the Marvel bullpen went over to the DC bullpen for a while too in the 90s, early. My friend Steve Bunch did that, and then he eventually was in editorial after that. Mm-hmm. And I think Tom Valente might be back with them. He was a guy who I worked with in the Marvel bullpen in the early 2000s.
I recognize his name.
I think he might be back at DC now. Yes, I have worked in publishing outside of comics. Though it's tough these days. It's actually tough for a guy to get a job in publishing, believe it or not. Publishing is so female, because we always hear so much about how comics are male dominated, but publishing overall is actually female dominated, except for some of the very highest positions. So it's actually tough one of the reasons I didn't have work for a few years is because getting work in publishing as a 50-year-old dude is nearly impossible. But yeah, I worked doing catalogs and some freelance doing some catalogs. I worked doing white papers and application notes for a few years in the 20 after Marvel. Mm-hmm. Where's Tim? Not that there's anything wrong with you guys. Tim is married and with a step kid who does band on Friday nights. So I think on Friday nights he's at football games or something watching the band. He's only been here, like I said, he was here like 10 shows ago, I think it is now. Was the last time he was around. So whenever Tim comes back, we'll of course be on with him. But
just married life in general.
Yeah. He popped on and did a show. I think he occasionally does shows on Sunday mornings these days.
Yeah, he's always done occasional videos on Sunday morning.
Right. So I think he did one this past Sunday.
That's usually when I'm catching up from staying up too late on Saturday night.
Yeah, matter of fact, I did some freelance. What was the name of it? They're still there. They're a publishing company that was in the same building as Marvel, 387 Park Avenue South. I wish I could remember their name. It's somewhere in my calendar. But they're actually still in that same building publishing stuff. So we need to bring up Tim's relationship. Yeah. Or at least have his kid quit band. What was the name? Oh, Sterling Publishing. That was the name of it, I think. They're also at 387 Park Avenue South, where Marvel used to be. And I used to, once again, someone else from Marvel, that they put their Sterling does regular books. I think I worked on their book catalog a bit back in the 90s. I did during the .com boom. I did stuff for a site called Uproar, where I used to do animated GIFs for them. Uproar, they were like a game site. They did like casual gaming things.
Right, I remember Uproar.
Right. They were one of the .com boom companies that busted, because my friends, I had a couple of friends working there. That's how I got work there. And they were just going public at sort of the end of the .com boom. Everybody, when you were working in a company that had an IPO and during the .com boom, you were able to buy the stock at the IPO price, and then it would shoot up, and you'd sell it and make a windfall.
Right.
So it's like you as a member of the company were able to buy the stock for, let's say, $100 a share, and then by day 3 it was up to $1,000 a share.
Right.
So you could spend $5,000 and all of a sudden make $50,000 in a week, and everybody was getting rich doing that. My poor friends, they were at the tail end of that, where the IPO would happen and nothing would go on. The stock would crash. So I had a couple of friends who were like, "Oh, they put a couple $1,000. No one was rich. They put a couple $1,000 they had in it, hoping to make 10 times their money like everybody else was,
right.
And instead they lost their $2,000. And it was just Uproar was one of those companies where they had an IPO and then nothing.
Yeah.
Sci-Fi Saturday on MeTV for me. That keeps him up late, I guess. I freelanced for a .com, such easy money for a brief while. Yeah. Like I said, I was making some good money, and let me tell you, it's in publishing as in life, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
And when you know them.
Right. Almost all my freelance jobs have come from people I know. Mm-hmm. The Uproar job was from people I know. I worked for an encyclopedia publisher preparing graphics for their CD-ROM. Why? Because I knew somebody there who needed someone to prepare their graphics. So much of it is who you know. And once you get to be a 50-year-old dude in publishing, who you know isn't as important anymore.
And you probably don't know as many people as you used to either.
They're in different areas and stuff. But it's like the jobs I'm working right now are because of people I know. It's nuts. Gotcha. Absolutely nuts. You know, I'm doing the Bad Idea comics because I used to work with the guys at Marvel. Mm-hmm. I'm teaching because one of my friends who I went to college with and worked at Marvel said they needed a teacher to teach what you do.
Yeah.
Okay. Getting stock via IP also came with tax liabilities that destroyed a lot of people in the 90s. Okay. See, I didn't know that. I only knew people who they had no tax liabilities because they made no money. They lost their money, unfortunately. Yeah, I remember when Marvel in the early 90s went public and they made a lot of people made a lot of money off of the stock.
Yeah, there was a lot of companies that just came and went in a fairly short amount of time.
Yeah. Did you play Uproar games?
I don't even remember what games they had, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know. They were just like web games.
Gotcha.
One of only 3 art, stationery, and drafting stores here closed recently and made me sad. I always think of the heyday of a city building at Marvel DC, you know, really good. They're used. Marvel had what some people called the never-ending art supply store. What was the name of the? I can't remember the. There used to be art supply stores all over. During the early 90s, at lunchtime at Marvel, there was at least 4 art stores in Midtown Manhattan within walking distance from Marvel that are gone now.
Yeah. And
there was one art store that, because Marvel, in the early 90s, it stopped all during bankruptcy and the cheapest man alive, taking over. Used to have an art supply closet where they'd give the artists supply. You could come in and pick up brushes and ink and pens and whatever else they got.
Yeah.
And those brushes that were $20 brushes. You come in and pick up half a dozen of them, inkers would, just because they provide them to you. Yeah. And I'm trying to remember the name. It was a big art store in Manhattan that used to supply Marvel. The salesman used to come in once a week with like gifts for everybody. That's how many art supplies Marvel bought from. And they had to spend their budget, and once again, it was corporate budgeting. So if you had $5,000 to stock up the art supply store this quarter or whatever it was, and you only spent $2,000 of it, the next quarter they only give you $2,000. So,
gotcha.
The people who were supplying they spent their $5,000, and they'd give you, and they'd hand out stuff because they knew if they next quarter or whatever it is, they have another $5,000 they have to spend, and if they don't spend it, their budget's going to get reduced. Yeah. So that's why in the bullpen used to always get free art supplies. Here, have some art supplies. Here, have this, have that. Have some art, because it was in the budget, and corporate whatever. You didn't want your budget was reduced. You had less power, so you never want your budget reduced. But yeah, the never-ending art supply room, that was good for us.
Every few months, I hear a story on Facebook. Somebody that is talking about an art supply store has closed, and then how they miss it.
Yeah.
We had a great one here where I live. It's a small college town, but because it's an engineering and architecture college, also.
Yeah.
They had lots of people coming in, and that place was great because you could go in and try all kinds of different pens and whatnot, free. Just writing to see which one you like the best. I wish it was still open, and I'm not even an artist. It was just a cool store.
I don't think there's a single art supply store left in my immediate area in Rockland, the whole county, which is a small county, but There's some art. There's Michael's around, arts and crafts stores, but no art supply stores.
Yeah, but they're not the same.
Yeah. Sounds like heaven. Man, I missed a well-stocked art stores. Yeah, the crazy amount of galleries and stuff in New York must have fed the need for a good paint and medium. Yeah, there's budget abuse. Now they always lower budgets unless you're in sales, which in case you need to sell more and more and more. Yeah, there's still like I know downtown I usually get my art supplies online from either Jerry's Artorama or Dick Blick. And sometimes I go, there's a brick and mortar Dick Blick store close, about half an hour away near me in New Jersey. Sometimes I go there, but that store is more expensive than online.
Right.
And then there's a big Dick Blick I found in Manhattan, which is somewhere around 20th Street. I don't remember where. Let's say 20th Street and 6th Avenue.
Right.
Holy crap, is that place expensive?
Yeah.
As you might imagine, a Manhattan art supply stores were never cheap, but they're especially expensive now.
No discounts at all.
Ooh.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was at least 3, if not 4 art supply stores that I went to in the Marvel area.
Mm-hmm.
Just at lunchtime, you'd find an art supply store, you'd buy something here and there. But yeah, they all went away. Like, it must have been a sad day for that art supply store when Marvel went digital, because.
Oh yeah, I imagine large chunk of their business just vanished.
Yeah. I mean, all the stuff Marvel used: rubber cement containers, tape holders, desks, brushes, ink, all sorts of stuff that would get used up. I'm always jealous of your Dick Blick art halls. Oh yeah, they're nice.
Yeah. I always hear creators talking about, they'll have favorite art tools.
Oh yeah.
Brushes, nibs, inks, papers, what have you. And when that goes away, they're always like, "Oh crap, what am I going to do now?"
I know and sometimes, like when you're like Winsor Newton. It's funny because I can remember like Winsor Newton Series 7 number 3 brushes are what like comic book inkers always used for their brush.
Yeah.
And I can remember when I first started using them in like 1990, I remember hearing older artists say, they don't make the brushes as good as they used to. But to me, they were pretty good in general.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know how good they used to be. I don't have any of those.
You had nothing to compare it to, right?
But now, 30 years later, I'm like, wow, they really don't make these as good as they used to.
Yeah.
And it's disturbing because, and when I say they don't make them as good as they used to, what happens is, and it's a $25 brush, is the brush is supposed to come to a fine point,
mm-hmm.
and it does for a little length of time. But like a week later, it stops coming to a point, and you're just like, I only got a week out of that $25 brush.
Did you ever trim the brushes?
No, you can't do that.
Okay, I just want.
We have a high-end crafting stores instead of art. Yeah. Michael's and Hobby Lobby. We don't have a Hobby Lobby. All the AC Moores closed around us, so they went out of business.
Oh wow, yeah, I remember there used to be an AC Moore store in Roanoke. Yeah.
I know I've heard the name Hobby Lobby, but I don't think there's any near here.
Oh gosh, and you used to find back in the 80s and 90s, not so much in the 2000s, you'd find model shops. So, model kits and whatnot. They are hard to find these days.
Even Pearl Paint in New York City is closed now. Pearl Paint was around for, I don't know, decades and decades.
Yeah.
It was down in Canal Street in Chinatown, and that was one of the big art stores I always used to go to. It had like 5 floors. And death stares that used to scare me because the building was so old that the stairs were worn down.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was grooves in all the stairs.
Right. Yeah.
That's how old and long it's been there.
Yeah.
Ooh. Trying to find art supplies locally for me is a big part of enjoying the craft. It makes me feel like part of the community way more than being craft and art councils and whatnot. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, there's no. I don't. There was one art supply store in, like I said, in my 20 minutes from here in my county that closed in the 90s. I haven't seen an art supply store since.
Yeah, all the office supplies around here closed too.
Yeah. It's weird. Another comic I got this week is Ant by Eric Larson, where he's doing his sort of different liney style. Where are we going here? He's not filling in a lot of blacks and is going with this lighter line weight style. Butt cheeks. And the story is kind of the mime lady. But it's some nice, I'm enjoying the style he's using. But the story is kind of weird in that this woman who is Ant we don't really know what's going on with her because she was in an asylum for an issue. We don't know what's real and what's not real and what's in her mind, and she's figuring it all out too.
Right.
So we as readers are figuring it all out with her. Well, boys, buy online. What can I say? That's what I do. I buy online my art supplies. It's all I can do, so I do it. I have no problem with buying online. But like I said, good solid Eric Larson here. I'm enjoying this. Issue 3. I have no idea how long it's going to last. Spawn is in this issue, and Ant and Savage Dragon is in the next issue. So he's teaming them up with other Image people. But yeah, what was that? 1, 2, 3. I'm trying to remember where the 4th art supply store was at Marvel in the 90s. I don't know. I can't visualize it now. A.I. Friedman. Was that the one that Marvel dealt with all the time? It may have been. Well, that may have been the one uptown more.
I imagine that was true with a lot of stores for whatever industries. You had a lot within, especially New York,
think about all the ad agencies that bought stuff at those art supply stores too, up until things went digital. Right. All those ad agencies buying all those markers and paper and whatever else their art department needed.
Neil Adams double dipping because they had to have him for the agency and for his comics work.
So. There you go. Continuity Studios having to buy all those art supplies. Sure, their art supply bill was not small.
I'm sure there's probably a warehouse somewhere that's full of stuff that never got used that people would love. And, oh my God, we found the mother lode.
Yeah. I still have some in a closet back there. Marvel used to get all this, but besides their drawing paper, which they used to hand out to the artists to make sure they drew things at the right size. Their illustration quality drawing paper with the blue lines on it and everything, the Marvel Comics logo. They also had paper, usually not of illustration quality, but other like big sheets of paper that we do the production on or have to paste things down on. Mm-hmm. When they were moving out of 387 Park Avenue in like 2000, 2001. And they were all fully digital by that time. They were getting rid of all this paper and stuff. And I took it, and it's like not even paper you draw on. It's like paper it's got like all blue lines. I guess you can still draw on it. But I took a whole bunch of that stuff, and it's like it's sitting in a closet for years. I took pads. They had so much. Oh, that's right. We used to use like vellum tracing paper all the time. The letterers would letter on. And we had tons. I took some pads of that, and it's like I hardly ever used that stuff. But they were getting rid of. They had to get rid of so much of that stuff when they were moving that people were just taking. It's like people got their drawing tables. It was like if you could, when Marvel was moving, if you could get because we used to have old drawing tables there that we work on, but when they went digital, we didn't need them anymore. We needed desks. So it was like if you could get your drawing table home, they'd give it to you. Yeah. And some people did. So it's like,
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think they have Jack Kirby's drawing table. Is it Smithsonian, I believe.
Utrecht, that was one of them, and that was a little further away from Marvel. So I was there a couple of times. I think they were downtown more. I think they're still around. I think Utrecht, they got bought by somebody. Maybe they got bought by Blick. I can't remember. But they were also a big brand.
Well, if it's farther away, that would have been an appropriate name because that means you had to trek farther to get to it.
Yeah, they weren't. I couldn't walk to Utrecht at lunchtime, but they were another big art store in Manhattan.
Gotcha.
Like, and they even had their own house brand of stuff. That's how I think they had a catalog too.
I remember seeing references to like different districts of New York back in the 70s, 80s, even more so years past of certain districts. Like you'd have a whole bunch of music stores or guitar stores and one set of streets, and bookstores in another area, things like that. It'd be interesting for me just to have a time machine and go back and visit.
Oh yeah, I used to go to.
Just
my friend Bunch was a record collector. And in the early 90s, we used to go at lunchtime or after work or something. I was never a record collector, but I'd go to the record store. Like Sounds was one of the famous ones that was downtown. And there's a few other famous record stores right around there. So it was like we just hit up the record stores, see what was around.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Not knowing I lucked into living in a good city for creative stores. St. John's still even have a few model shops. It's one of the oldest cities in North America. Yeah, I guess so. I guess if you can get established. What was that?
St. John's in Newfoundland?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's real hard to find model shops around here. I just saw.
Isn't that where GPAP is from too, Sean? St. John's?
Yeah, I just saw something the other day where like a really well-known model shop in Ventura closed, and everybody was like, "Oh man!" So evidently, rented Ventura downtown is like astronomical too. So.
Yep, GPAP is from St. John's too. Okay, yeah. Bookstore, another victim of online shopping, that's for sure. But they say like there's a lot of little independent bookstores that are doing well.
I was going to say a lot of smaller bookstores are starting to pop back up now.
Yeah, but I'm sure they're like record stores these days, very specialized. Yeah. You know what died in the 90s too? Baseball card stores.
Yep.
There was
a bunch of them at one time.
Oh, yeah. There was like 5 of them in the county in the 90s, and they just all went away. All of them. It's kind of nuts. And it's like there's not even the like comic shop / baseball card stores anymore.
We had a bunch of those too. Yeah, sure did.
Hey, Scott, 3D printing is a great way to make models now. Yeah, my friend Rob does.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I need to ask Rob a couple questions because there's some more games I want to make some miniatures for, and you can buy 3D files for those. And
where is
interesting?
Whoop! It fell down. Hold on 1 second. Let me see if I can get it.
I mean, Sleepy brings up a good point. I'm sure those are probably passion products for the owners, and I've often heard that the way to get $1 million in your bookseller is to start off with $2 million.
Yeah. Tiny used bookstores popping up. Yeah, could be. This is one. My friend Rob 3D printed this. He doesn't do 3D models. He just does a 3D. So you can find 3D models of like the Silver Surfer online and download them for free and then print them out on your printer. There's Silver Surfer he made, and there's a Savage Dragon. So he just 3D prints this stuff. So that's one of his hobbies. He likes working the 3D printer.
Yeah.
And he makes all sorts of, if he can find a 3D model for it, he can print it. So He's printed stuff for other friends. Those wargaming models are small, so they might be easier to print.
They can be. Yeah. There's a couple different scales for them too.
Right. Oh, I got Scott, another issue of Scott's favorite book, Spawn, number 327.
3 more times.
And I'm telling you, Sleepy, you got to read the Spawn that Todd McFarlane isn't writing. Because the Spawn is, I'm not going to tell you it's the greatest book ever. I'm buying it because it's still $2.99. But Rory McConville is writing it and not Todd McFarlane. So it's better than when Todd McFarlane was writing it. and I saw there was a big they did an alternate cover for this, which is a piggyback cover with his Spider-Man #1 that's got Haunt in the Spider-Man #1 position that I think everybody was buying this week, but I passed up on it and went for the regular old not very good cover because I'm just tired of those piggyback covers.
Right. So Mr. Gretzy said the used bookstore in his town in Clayton, North Carolina. So that's the place. I love places like that.
Wow.
Mr. Gretzky, what part of North Carolina is Clayton in? What's it near? Because I live about 3 hours north of Charlotte myself.
They do well, only store in the county. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. Yeah. Don't read the Todd McFarlane because I think Sleepy has been picking up Gunslinger Spawn, which Todd McFarlane has been writing that one. And I don't think Sleepy's been thrilled with the writing on it.
Who'd have thunk it?
Who, as you might well imagine.
I will have to say, Sleepy did his video the other day where he's talking about Radio Spaceman.
Okay.
It does look better in print. I don't know if maybe just the 2 pages side by side or whatever, but
you
read
it
look better in print than it does me reading it digitally.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes the things when you actually, it read a lot better in print for me. You're Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay. Next time I'm down that way, I will have to check it out. Then.
It's Spawn Gunslinger is going downhill rapidly. Yeah. Howard Chaykin's Hey Kid comics. Mm-hmm. I first read digitally and then bought them off eBay because I somehow missed the series except for the last issue. Volume 1, that is. I read them digitally and then went, you know what? I want physical copies of these. Bought them physically, and I liked them so much better reading them physically. So that was one where I was like, oh, wow, that one really was better physically. Todd needs to send you some love checks for keeping up your Spawn support. He sure does. Love checks. Those aren't royalties. Those are love checks.
He's sending you some of that Mark McGuire baseball money.
I wonder how much are those balls worth now? I have no idea.
No, I imagine they're still probably worth quite a bit, but not as much as they once were.
But I don't. He's never sold them, right? He put them on tours. I don't even know. I've heard neither tell nor tale of those.
I would have think if he had sold them, you'd probably heard about it. But
yeah.
Who knows?
Because he spent like $1 million or $2 million on them, right?
Yeah, and then what's the next year later? Somebody else comes along and breaks the record. You're like,
right.
How's that $1 million hanging there, Todd? Shut up.
but with the way, like collectibles have shot up in the last 2 years, maybe they're worth something again. I couldn't follow the cast of characters in Hey Kids.
I mean,
I agree with you there, and I have to say, having just read, I don't know if Sleepy was here the week I read Twilight. A couple weeks ago, I bought the series Twilight from the early 90s.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I was talking about it. Chaykin wrote it. Jose Garcia Lopez drew it. And I realized then, reading that, what Chaykin does that's confusing, that he still does, is he changes scenes and you have no clue he changes scenes a lot of the times. Like, he doesn't give you a meanwhile back at the ranch, or he doesn't give you a, meanwhile at Verve Comics headquarters. The scene just changes, and you're not quite. And reading it works about half the time, and the other half of the time, I'm confused for half a page until I realize, oh, he changed scenes. Right. These are all new characters. Because a lot, and I think that was happening on. Besides, Hey Kids, having a large cast of characters, he just changed scenes every other page, and you weren't sure if he changed scenes or not until you get two or three panels into it, and you're like, oh yeah, he changed scenes. So that like confusion sticks with me for a little bit, and I don't think it's a good storytelling style.
I mean, not only that, but you almost have to be a comics historian anyways
to understand
who all the analogs are.
One of the reasons I like the digital one the physical one better than the digital, because it was easy to flip back to the character key. Right. I'd just go, who's that again? Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. When I was reading it digitally, I couldn't do that as easily.
I'm sure a lot of the characters are also just mashups of maybe 3 or 4 different people.
Yeah, some you can tell who they are, some you can't. Mm-hmm. The baseballs aren't around anymore because each of those balls is the owner of several companies for tax reasons. Evening. 62 Lefty Blue.
Yeah, baseball collectors are really hardcore too.
Yeah. Snowing here in Memphis, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Tennessee.
We're supposed to get snow tomorrow here.
Yeah, I think we're getting some tonight, tomorrow, but not much. We had some on Wednesday when I had to travel into the city. That was no fun. I don't like traveling through snow very much, but it wasn't bad. So it was mostly slush. Yeah, but hey, like I said, realizing Chaykin did that made me look at his work a little differently. He's making me work for this when maybe he shouldn't.
I'm sure I may have mentioned this to you before. I've talked about it with other people, but it's always been interesting to me that when I read a print interview with Howard Chaykin, he can come off a little gravelly.
Yeah.
But when I see him on video, it's completely different.
And he's much more charming.
Yeah, exactly.
On video.
Like it's a weird sort of like, that's the same person? Yeah.
The one time I met him and got to hang out with him, hello from sunny Arizona. Oh yeah. It's a dry heat. I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun hanging out. Like I said, he was doing a con. He was sitting next to Bob Wyachek, who I went to the con with. Mm-hmm. So I was just sitting out and chatting with Howard. Good guy. Had a lot of fun with him. Matter of fact, Bob, somewhere back there, I'll have to dig it out, bought me a piece of original art, a Howard Chaykin art, for my birthday that year, because he got it from. But Howard Chaykin doesn't do pages anymore. He draws all individual figures and panels and puts them together in Photoshop. So it's like all of his drawings are on like individual sheets of paper.
Gotcha.
It's kind of weird.
Like a collage now, basically.
Yeah, he collages everything together digitally after drawing it physically.
I mean, if it's easier to work that way, why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah. I mean, I've done pieces. As a matter of fact, I just did something like that, but I never thought of doing like whole comics pages, whole comics like that.
I just thought, how left-handers would always have the problem where
they smear.
And they had to smear it. I imagine when they got tablets, they're like, hey, thank you. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
When you're drawing, you don't have to draw from left to right. So it's only writing where you smear. You draw the page the opposite way.
Yeah, that's true.
You ever see Eric Larson hold a pencil?
No.
Look up Eric Larson. He holds it really weird, like this or something. He has this very strange, and everybody goes, "Doesn't your hand hurt?" And he's like, "No."
Yeah. There's a guitar player named Marty Friedman that does that when he picks. He holds his wrist at a weird angle, and everybody's always like, "Oh man, that's gotta hurt."
I just hurt my wrist imitating it.
Right.
That's kind of crazy.
It was interesting. The only two artists I've really seen draw at length, other than just see him draw at conventions or whatnot, was Charles Vess, because I visited his studio. And then when we stayed with Mike Kaluta in New York, I got to see him draw them somewhat.
Okay.
It's just interesting to watch guys draw, to see how they...
Mark Teixeira was one of the most interesting guys to see work, because I learned a lot just from watching him work, because he would paint his black and white pages in that he would have like he wasn't precious about it too, and he'd always say, people ask me what I ink with, what's ever in my hand. He'd mostly use a brush, sometimes a pen, but he'd use like whiteout, a bottle of whiteout. So he'd like put brush marks down. Then he'd get the whiteout and draw with the whiteout. Then go with the brush in some more with it. And then the pen and draw some stuff in there with the pen. He was like using both hands.
I remember talking to Jeff Smith at Heroes Con one time, and we're talking about original artworks. Like, you should see my originals, because boy, they look like crap. Because he had that. And I've seen the artist edition that I have of Mark Schultz's Xenozoic Tales.
Right.
Is the complete opposite.
Yeah.
It is pristine.
Right.
I mean, the original art is like, it's ready to go. You can just plop it down and print it. The only thing you see sometimes in that is like the guidelines for lettering.
Yeah. I think the Usagi Yojimbo artist edition is like that too.
Right.
There's no corrections and things in Usagi.
To me, it would also be interesting to watch Mike Mignola draw, just to see, because he has, so high contrast values, like blacks and white, whatnot.
Right.
It would just be interesting for me to see him do that.
Right. Jared, have you posted videos you're drawing? I like the one you did a few months ago. I have a playlist. I haven't posted one recently, but I have a playlist of, I don't know, a whole bunch of them, 50 of them or something, of me drawing. I think you can click on my playlists in my, it's like ASMR drawing or something like that. And I did a whole bunch of them over a couple of years, but I haven't done any in a while.
Have you seen a video you can find it on YouTube, where shot in France back in, I don't know, maybe the mid 70s? We had Mobius and maybe it was John Buscema. I can't remember the other artists, but there was Mobius and a few other well-known comics artists, and they were drawing. I would assume the footage was probably shot in France too. It's interesting to watch.
I always loved Tex art as a kid. His style seemed so free. Him and early Jay Lee, ink slinging at super speed. I agree with that. Though I liked Jay Lee later on.
I haven't heard Jay Lee's name in quite a while, now that I think about it.
He still does stuff. He's still around. And he's one of those people who was so nice. I liked his artwork better after meeting him.
Right.
I can't remember when it was, sometime like 93, 94. He spent a week in the Marvel bullpen. He was a West Coast guy. He came in for a week. I forget what he was working on, but he spent a week in the Marvel bullpen drawing on whatever book he was doing, and he was just such a nice guy.
That's one of the nice things about being a comics fan, is the vast, and I'm talking like 98% of the artists that I've met are really nice people.
Yeah.
And then you end up liking them better after, getting to know them a little bit.
Yep.
Ron Randall's great.
Yeah. It's hard. Though there are plenty of guys who are jerks, but you don't want to meet them. Let's see. The last comic I got for the week was Radiant Red, issue 1 of 5. Pardon me.
I like the logo.
Yeah, pretty nice logo. And I'll show you some of the art inside. And this is a Radiant Black tie-in miniseries. And this character showed up in Radiant Black. Radiant Red wants you. She showed up in Radiant Black in the early issues as a kind of a villain. But then we found out she wasn't really, because she was robbing banks. And Radiant Black went to see if he could figure something out and stop her from writing bank. They got into a fight. And matter of fact, the interesting thing about Radiant Black is it's just a suit that these guys happen to get.
Right.
Scott is pre-ordering Radiant Yellow and Purple.
That's actually funny.
I like that. It's just a suit that these guys happen to get. And when Radiant Black and Radiant Red were fighting, a building collapsed on Radiant Black and almost killed him. And his friend is now the star of the book, who took over the suit.
Right.
And we get to find out she's really this. She's really a middle school teacher. And this is kind of the story about. And she only robbed banks because she was so desperate because her husband had gambled away all their money. And she found this suit which gave her superpowers. And this is kind of her story of how that happened. So the first issue was pretty cool. Jared, one of my favorite videos of yours is when you did your busted brush style and one of your monsters and told the story in the monster voice. Oh, those are tough. I haven't done one of those in years. Oh, those were my storytelling, and I would draw something, and as I was drawing it, I would tell a story. And whoo, they were hard to do because I'd make up the story as I was going, so it was like my nephew used to really like those ones. But man, I have to. Whoo, those were tough. It is tough to draw and make up a story at the same time.
Too?
What was that?
Did you do different voices for different characters?
I did at times, yeah.
Gotcha.
And they were just nuts. I'll try that again if I can. I just remember it's kind of tough to your monster voice is Tom. Tom Waits. There we go. Tom Waits was my monster voice.
That's an easy voice to do.
Yeah. Could have been. I am a Tom Waits fan, so I could have slipped into that.
Steve Vai is a huge Tom Waits fan.
I remember there being some story about a frog, too. I can't remember what. I'll have to go back and look at those. Bob Ross versus Jared. He was much calmer.
Still hard to think of Bob Ross as being a drill sergeant.
See, to me, I was a Bill Alexander guy before Bob Ross came around. So to me, it was like Bob Ross stole Bill Alexander's show. Except,
speaking of like art TV shows, are you familiar with a guy that used to do a show? I guess it probably would have been back in the 60s, maybe in the late 50s. His name was John Nagy.
No.
Okay. Because I've heard a lot of different artists mention that he was an influence on them when they were young.
John, don't know him.
Spelled Gnagy.
Nope, don't recognize it.
Gotcha.
Famous Artist School. Though I did, the Famous Artist School. You've seen that. It was only in reading that. It was the George Petty book that I learned that they went bankrupt and he lost a lot of money because he stayed in it to be loyal to his friend who bailed out. Because I think it was in the early 60s they found out that none of the famous artists were. They had an expose where none of the famous artists were judging the art that was sent in by the students.
Right.
And these guys, like all the famous artists, owned stock in it and got dividends and such. And like I said, there was this big brouhaha over it. And I think it was Petty, who did another one of the guys who's in the famous said, "Don't sell your stock. We all have to hang on to our stock so the price doesn't collapse." Meanwhile, the guy who said that bailed and sold his stock. So Petty, Petty, who listened to him, stock became worthless, and he lost a huge source of income and money. So, That was an interesting. I never knew that about the Famous Artist School.
It brings up just a memory for me. I don't remember what publisher it was. I don't even know what years they were. I think they were probably done maybe in the 40s, maybe even in the 30s. But there was a series of portfolios that had art pieces from a lot of different famous artists at the time, and they were all illustrators.
Right.
Charles Vess had a set of them, and there's a lot of competition to buy those when they come up on the secondary market now because they're rare these days.
Right.
But those were pretty neat.
Yep. Petty had some of those. They said because in those days illustrators were rock stars,
right?
And that was like the only place you could get like sexual imagery is like Petty's. There was no Playboy Penthouse pinups. There was just magazine sexy girls in magazines, and not even nude or anything like that. That does sound petty, yeah. You can still buy John Nagy art kits.
Okay. I had heard that. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. If you guys don't know who Bill Alexander is, he was a German guy. He had a German accent. And before there was Bob Ross, there was Bill Alexander. And matter of fact, the Bob Ross technique is actually the Bill Alexander technique. He taught it to Bob Ross, and Bob Ross eventually took over the show. And there was also Bill Alexander art supplies, which I think I have a Bill Alexander palette knife. Hold on a second. I have to walk over here and see if that says it on it. Where'd it go? Oh, well, I can't find it. I think it's a Bill Alexander palette knife. It's like a special shape. And then when Bob Ross took over, they just changed all the branding.
The logos got changed.
They just changed the logos on the art supplies.
Right.
All of a sudden, it became Bob Ross. And I was like, Bill Alexander is pretty forgotten now.
I'm sure there are a lot of earlier TV's personalities that were huge back in the day that probably many people just don't know about anymore.
Yeah, Bill Alexander was the 80s, too. It wasn't that long ago.
Well, I mean, if you think about it now, the 80s was 40 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but YouTube
that way, but yeah.
YouTube has brought all the Bob Ross stuff back. There's like a lot of Bob Ross fans now who just like his peaceful voice.
If I was assuming we continue to live that long as in the human race, if I was a sociologist or an archaeologist 200 years from now, the best tool ever invented for that is going to be YouTube.
And all these blogs. Hopefully some of these blogs will still be around where they can see what life was like 200 years ago. I've been writing my blog for 15 years now. Once a week, so.
All right.
Jared, if you're still looking for 20s and 30s fashion reference, look for Lawrence Fellows illustrations. I will. I've been using, I looked at a lot of Pinterest stuff too. I think you may have mentioned.
Pinterest is an evil time sucker.
Nah. Most of the stuff is too low res for me.
Gotcha.
Lawrence Fellows. Yeah, I'm not familiar with him, so I will have to look him up.
He's an unfamiliar fellows to you.
Yeah. I'll have to. Bill Alexander has Bill Alexander's on YouTube too. Okay, I didn't even know. I figured he had to have some, but I haven't looked. But he doesn't have a peaceful voice like Bob Ross, so. Make big, strong, powerful mountains. Oh, Bill Alexander with his German accent.
Happy big trees.
Yeah. Big, strong, powerful. I'm still trying to decide if I want to get that EC Artist Edition covers.
Well, you want it.
Oh, yeah. If I'm actually going to get it.
I just don't have the money for it.
Yeah. What it is I also want the Hate box set. But I only have the money for one of them. And I have all the stuff that's in the Hate box set. So I really should get the artist edition. Assuming there's still a functional electrical grid.
Speaking of functional electrical, I just read an article today that we're getting closer and closer to nuclear fusion.
Ah, I've been hearing that my whole life, so we'll have to see.
All right.
We're this close to cold fusion. This close.
It's always that extra little tiny percent that keeps you from doing stuff.
No. The actual getting it finished part.
Yeah.
Do. Radiant. So now I'm buying 3 Radiant Black books. Buying Radiant Black, Rogue Sun, and Radiant Red. And I wasn't sure if I was going to buy the other 2, but they were actually good. Yeah, we're getting close to nuclear war, too. Hopefully we'll get nuclear fusion before we get there.
We do live in some interesting times, don't we?
Fellows was a top illustrator for Apparel Arts as well as for Esquire. Okay.
I would assume he'd been working in the 20s or 30s then?
Yeah.
40s, so. Maybe? Yeah.
It was only last week I tried to track down a vintage desk skeleton reference model. Can't remember the kooky name old art guys gave them. Mr. Fravies or something crazy sounding. Oh, okay. I know what you mean, but I have
can probably... It's funny, but this is true of a lot of things. If you're looking for a skeleton model, you can probably find it cheaper from a biological supply place than you can from an art store. It always seems to be the case where, like, if you're looking for something specific, there's another industry that doesn't focus as much on it where you can get it cheaper that way.
Yeah. Let's see, my friend Bunch just DM'd me a question over there. What's more visually bland than a Dick Ayers Sergeant Fury? He's reading a bunch of Sergeant Fury right now. And he's saying, what's more visually bland than a Dick Ayers Sergeant Fury comic? A Dick Ayers Sergeant Fury comic inked by Vince Colletta.
Going back to the archaeology thing again, sometime, I don't know, 100 years from now, somebody's going to say, man, artists really hated this guy, Vince Colletta. He must have been a major asshole or something.
Soon to be irradiated black. Yeah, but I must say these Radiant Black spin-off comics have been pretty decent so far. And I like I said, Radiant Red I know is only 5 issues. I don't know if Rogue Sun is ongoing or not, but seems almost everything is not ongoing I buy. So,
all right.
So that's okay. I would be okay if it's not an ongoing. It can run out.
Most of the stuff I've bought since, probably the 90s, just it doesn't come out on a monthly basis.
No, me either.
It's like 6-issue miniseries and one-shots. And
if I didn't have
a Jimbo, but
yeah, if I didn't have a pull list since I was 15, I wouldn't have any of the comics I have.
Right.
I certainly wouldn't have all that Osagi Ujimbo I have without a pull list, because those just the stuff I buy, there's just not shelf copies of.
Right.
Dick Ayers' work on Mantech is wonderful. What is Mantech? I don't even know.
Mantech either.
I remember Dick Ayers. I had a my friend Ed, back when we were in college. I think Dick Ayers lived in Westchester, where we went to college. And he managed to call him up and get an invite to his studio. So we went over to Dick Ayers' studio when he was a college student and met with him. And at that time, Dick Ayers was working on Daffy Gaddafi, which was an indie book, parody book of Colonel Gaddafi.
Right.
Talk about an early 80s reference.
So that would have been, what, about 83, 84, somewhere in through there?
Probably later than that. I think when we were in college, it was 84 to 86. So
okay.
Somewhere in there.
Gotcha.
I think I may have the issue in there, in my collection somewhere. I'd have to look for it. Daffy Gaddafi by Dick Ayers.
I bet that probably doesn't age well either.
I'm going to have to look for it now.
Like 40 years later, the people like, who's Gaddafi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in my random indie one-shots from the 80s, wherever I store those. I think the comic industry should move all titles to a limited number of issues. Comics going on and on with changing creators, it's not the way. Thoughts? I think they do. I don't think there are many comics that go on and on changing creators. Most relaunch, Marvel and DC relaunch almost everything now. Whenever the new creators come on, they get a new number one. See, I don't like that because for me, that Daffy Kaddafi book is great. All right, no one knows it. All right. For me, the number... Now, I realize I'm not your average Marvel and DC fan. I mostly gave up Marvel and DC in the mid-'80s. Occasionally, I'd come back and buy stuff. But I don't even occasionally come back and buy stuff anymore. Yeah, that's not a real 1040. They renumbered it and relaunched it and then relaunched it again with the old number.
Yeah.
They'll relaunch it again with number one when they want to, and then relaunch it back to the old number when they want to. The numbers are meaningless now. But one of my last connections with certain comics was the number. You know, I read Spider-Man from issue 167 to issue 250, let's say, or maybe 260, somewhere. So if you were to give me that, I remember I bought issue Spider-Man 300, the Todd McFarlane issue. I would check in Spider-Man here. The number was like my connection to my last connection with the series. Once they started, now I see a number in a comic and it means nothing to me. I have no connection with the comics I used to read.
I mean, that's just interesting. That proves to you the psychological power of numbers.
Yeah, exactly. You think they should retire? Yeah, he thinks they should retire them. I understand people saying that. But it's like once DC renumbered everything, the numbers meant, in Marvel too. Like I see Spider-Man 42 and it means nothing to me.
Could you imagine being a new reader these days, coming into it, not knowing the history of things, just blank slate?
Yeah, that's how everybody
tells you want to get this series. It's Spider-Man, whichever, and then you're like, which Spider-Man number one is it that I should get?
There is that, but like I always say, we had no choice but to do that when we were young. The problem is they have tons of choices now.
Right.
And when you have if you wanted to read Spider-Man when we were kids, you went to the store and you picked up one of the titles that had Spider-Man on it.
Right.
But now there's like between dollar bins and digital and back issues. Whew. The numbers mean nothing to the new readers. Yeah, I don't know if they do or don't. The number one certainly means
something. They had a chance to establish?
That's why they
could mean something to a new reader yet.
Yeah.
But
Spider-Man and the rest.
That's an interesting point. Is how many new characters are coming out from the big two these days?
I don't know. Some.
Not many.
Yeah. But I'll bring up Masked Panther again, who's the young guy who said it's annoying to him that his generation doesn't have anything of their own.
Right.
It's all leftover stuff from previous generations. And I said, I never thought of that before. It's true.
Just think, a couple months from now, we could have a new White Wingfoot number one.
We could have anything. But I don't think numbers mean much to comic books anymore, besides number one. People love number one still and buy number ones.
Years ago, they used to.
Yeah. Years ago, if you bought a number 121 of something because you knew it would keep coming out.
I wonder how much of that is also an American phenomenon, where you have, say, like Phantom being published by Frew Publications down in Australia. They're up into the 3,000s.
Yeah. Batman has tons of Batman because Batman's what sells. That's what they ended up doing.
Oh God, I couldn't even think of being a new comics reader coming in, just knowing nothing about it, wanting to discover Batman now.
Yeah, it's, like you said, the question: where do you
start? Yeah,
that, and people nowadays, like younger people, are used to having definitive starting points with everything. Like I said, in the 70s, we didn't. With comics, it was whatever on the stand. With TV, it was whatever was on the TV. You watch it live now. Maybe you catch the reruns in the summer if you're lucky. Both with everything being at their fingertips, they can be overwhelmed by the sheer number of stuff. The only numbers that matters to new readers are grade and perpetual resale value. There is that too.
Yeah, I don't 9.6.
No, 9.6s are terrible. We need 9.8s or bust. 9.6, you've wasted your time.
Yeah, but you get it for half the price.
That's true. And you're not going to read it anyway. But yeah, if I were starting to reading comics today, where to start would be the question. Because like I said, that was not a question for us. You picked up whatever was on the newsstand.
Right. Then again, you have so much stuff to pick from these days that.
Well, that's it. We never had a shortage of. We never had a shortage of what to pick from. But there's even more. There's 100 times the stuff now.
Right.
And in that, it's like if I'm 10 years old in 1976 and I want to read a Spider-Man comic, I go to the newsstand and there's what? Amazing Spider-Man. Maybe there's
Spectacular
Spider-Man. Maybe there's Marvel Team Up. Those probably only one of those is going to be on the stand at the same time. So if I want to read Spider-Man, I pick Spider-Man.
Right.
Nowadays, if you go into a comic store and you want to read Spider-Man, well, what do you want to read? You want to read a trade? You want to read an issue? We got back issues and
in one way, there's pros and cons. In one way, it's good because you have
it's good
stuff to pick from. In another way, it's like, where do I start?
I think it's good, but I can see how it would be overwhelming too.
Right.
Yeah. There are readers and there are collectors. Yeah, all these. If you're buying alternate covers, you're a collector. Because no one is ever going to read their alternate covers. You're going to read the regular cover one. So those are like but I find it interesting the way they kind of split the industry between readers and collectors. They found stuff to sell to collectors that readers don't care about, but collectors will buy. It's kind of interesting. They created sort of a collecting wing. Turning it back into the hobby with a gap from 95 to 2019. I had no idea where to start. I'm still totally confused. Wow. Yeah, I can see that. There's so much because all those comics from 1995 to 2019 are in the comic shop and available. That was not the case in 1976. Yeah, speculators too. Those are a whole other thing. Young readers probably can't afford to buy a lot of comics. Salaried adults complain it's too expensive. Then there is that.
Yeah, that's true too.
Then there is that. And I always think back to in the 90s, my local comic shop owner used to say that comics used to be the first thing that kids could buy with their own money. Because because they were cheap, kids could buy them for, a dime, 50 cents, a quarter. And that was their own money they could buy them. They didn't have to ask their parents for money.
Right.
Nowadays, I don't know if kids ask for their parents for money or just use a credit card automatic. I don't know how it works. Because so much is bought by credit card these days.
Right.
And you hear all these stories about kids running up the credit card online accidentally. That I'm like, do kids even have their own money to buy? And I know a lot of kids buy $50 video games, but they do it with their parents' credit card. I don't know.
Interesting.
That's why I only stay in dollar bins and indie books. Everything else is too overwhelming. Yeah, I understand that. Young readers, there's a couple of them. I sold off a big collection A+ years ago. My son didn't have any interest in it. Wow, I started back collecting a year ago, and I collect artists. I like it. Yeah, I'm a reader. I've been following creators since I was like 12. Star Wars comic, the 35 cents. Ah, the good old days. Yeah.
Well, see, that was because Gene Day came in and had to draw it, and then
But yeah, back in those days, I bought all the comics with my allowance money. I didn't have to ask for. I didn't have to save up for it. I didn't have to ask for it. I just, get my dollar allowance for doing my chores and buy some comics.
I remember the first issue of Savage Sword of Conan I bought off of a rack at a drugstore.
Huh. I teach undergrad students who are borderline illiterate. Wow.
It shocked me when I got into. I didn't realize when I got in college I could have tested out English 101 and 102 if anybody had bothered to tell me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When I went to my first college was a community college, upstate a bit. And I was taking English 101 and I was stunned. Because I
was like, did you guys not go to school at all?
Exactly. Yeah. That's how they didn't know what a verb was. They didn't know. And in like in public high school, you're segregated by intelligence. It's like I was always in with the smart kids.
Right.
So I went in with the, community college isn't all smart kids in one class. The teacher had to tell me to stop answering the questions. But they didn't know. I mean, we were in English 101. It was like they never had a high school English class. I was stunned.
Well, one of the things I thought was weird too is like I went to, grew up in a small town. And of course, small towns, especially in the South, have a reputation for not exactly being the intellectual center of the universe. When I got into college, I realized, man, I got a lot better education than a lot of these people in big cities.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I realize that sometimes, too. Jared, you and cartoonist kayfabe, good job. Read more comics. There are sometimes, like, I'd be talking to my friend Julio, who was like, 20 years younger than me or something. And he's from the Bronx. Not a great area in the Bronx, too. And sometimes I'd be talking to him about something basic that I learned in high school. I'd just be like, he didn't know. And I'd be like, wow, your high school let you down. That's what I always said, because he's a smart guy. Right. It's not like but I could just tell. It's like, your high school let you down. Because he didn't grow up in a nice suburban high school like I did. Right. Read more comics. Yeah, cartoonist kayfabe I check out every once in a while, but they put out too many videos for me to keep up with.
That's the problem. See, like every time I see a video I want to watch on YouTube, but don't want to watch at the time, I'll put it in my watch later list.
Yeah.
And eventually it just builds up to the point it's like, I'm never going to have time to get around to reading or looking at all.
Yeah, this is too overwhelming. I used to be subscribed to them, but then I unsubscribed just because there were too many videos. And I'm like, I go back and check. When I hear about a good video with them, I go back and check it out. Right. Plus, there's just and a lot of times with me, they're preaching to the converted kind of thing. Like they're showing off a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
They're showing off a lot of stuff that is new to other people, but isn't new to me. So,
right.
So
But it's always cool to see something that's new to somebody else and how they get excited about it.
Oh yeah, I like that they do it. I just don't need to watch it. Right. That's all. I like that they do it. But it's not one.
I still want to go back and watch all the McFarlane Gaiman trial.
Oh, those ones are good. I've been enjoying those ones. I haven't gone back in a while, but I listened to 3 or 4.
Because I remember reading about those trials in like CBG back in the day.
Yeah. That was some good stuff. Huh. Honestly, I don't watch many YouTube vids over 20 minutes. I don't actually watch them. I listen to them. Right. So I put them on as I'm working. If I'm drawing over here, I'll put a video on.
Right. I've also got used to watching that at either double or triple speed as well.
Okay, yeah.
Depending on who the person is, if you can understand them.
Yeah, I can't
you
do
can
that.
Get that speed. I will do it that way just to get through them faster.
Yeah, I understand that, but I can't. Yeah, I don't want to get through them faster.
Some people you have to slow them down to understand them. And other people you're like, you want to speed them up. You know?
You made me buy Spawn. I forgive you. Hey, I never said Spawn was good. I said I'm buying it because it's $2.99, and I feel I should support the last of the $2.99 books. And it's better when John McFarlane's not writing it. I usually just listen while walking or doing chores. Me too. I'll look over if someone's showing a cover or something. All right, well, we're at wind down time now, so we should say good evening. And good
evening.
Everybody out there, have a good night.
And a better tomorrow.
And read more comics. And we'll get Paolo on next week for the full show, and he doesn't have to work. What was that?
But not Spawn.
Not Spawn.
Better comics.
But for $2.99, you won't find a better comic.
Or a worse one.
Nighty night, cavernous ones. Okay. You all have a good night out there.
Bye.